Welcome everybody to MogTalk. MogTalk is a show about Final Fantasy XIV community, discussing everything from Savage Raiding to Chocobo Racing. And today is... I'm all out of order here. Fuck it. It's July 3rd, 2021. And today we are going to be talking about tanks. We're going to talk about the our kind of exit review of tanks throughout Shadowbringers and everything. Before we get started too much, though, I do want to make sure everybody knows who is on the show, so we're not just kind of sitting here a little awkward and, Sausage already, his face looks like he's a little uncomfortable here. So let's get started with Ren. Ren, if you could tell everybody who you are.
Hey everybody, my name is Rin and I'm a tank main. I'm the 10-time champion of the world, and I'm here to tell you that you're in for a good talk today with my brothers, Zheph and Sausage Roll.
What was that noise at the very end? I don't know how you made that.
There are things I can do that I don't like to give the magic away, because they make you feel feelings in yourself that I don't feel myself.
All right, Brock. All right. Zheph, if you could tell everybody who you are.
Okay, so I'm Zheph. I've been a tank main since beginning of Stormblood, and I am Rin's Karma counterpart.
Okay. Karma counterpart. Is that what you said?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Not K-A-R-M-A.
Oh, calmer.
Yes,
I thought like it was like
yeah.
the good and the bad here or something. I was like,
I'll get what's coming to me.
Yeah. All right. And last but not least, first time on the show, Sausage Roll. Could you tell everybody who you are?
Oh, I am Sausage Roll, or Sauce for short. I'm a hardcore raider in Final Fantasy. I mostly play tanks, and I enjoy optimizing them in difficult content like Savage and Ultimate.
So, just out of curiosity, why couldn't I find any footage of you playing a tank? If that's true, I only saw Dancer there, dude.
So, I don't have any VODs, at least in the past weeks, because I've had internet issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's pretty much it. Typically, you'd find a lot of griefing moments.
Okay, that's so. Explain. So let's do this first, because you threw a picture up there a second, Ren. Something about reprisal, and I feel like it wasn't explained, and maybe only a couple people might understand. Could you explain what you're talking about here?
So, for those of you who don't know, I've been tanking since Creator, Alexander, and in Stormblood, I met young Sausage Roll. Very strapping lad, excited, eager to go. We go into a mega MNF. He goes, how'd I go? And I go, oh, well, if you look on your hotbar, you'll see this ability. It reduces the damage taken by enemies. It's called Reprisal. And he goes, no, basically what I went down was you can maximize your number of uses if you use this here and I use this. We'll have something for everything, rather than in this situation where we have like one use over 7 minutes. And I understand it's a very long cooldown, not that long. And from there, dude, Sausage has grown, adapted, taken all the teachings, and passed me. If you don't know who Sausage Roll is, one of the best tanks in the world, and very, very humble, and so humble in fact that he mains Dancer.
The one time, dude, I swear.
So,
You found it.
yeah. I was like, okay, let's get this Dancer footage apparently for this. When Ren was like, hey, get Sausage Roll on here, because he's like, everybody thinks about this guy. He's like, this is the tank of the tanks, and like, I'm like, okay, cool. Then I went to your Twitch channel. I'm like, what the fuck is this?
Dancer point of view.
Yeah. What
is
even
that?
this?
Frosty's face at that time.
What?
Just
No.
Okay. Well, I'm going to trust everybody's opinion here, and that Sausage Roll is going to be an amazing part of this show to discuss tanks and kind of our thoughts on everything as we leave Shadowbringers, because we're leaving it for 5 months now. We're on our way, slowly walking into Endwalker, right? And so I feel like it's a good time to just kind of go back and look at where we are with tanks. We're not going to have a new tank for like at least 6 years, right? I mean, that might be the next time that we have a new tank. So I think in this situation, we need to figure out if there's any issues right now, what they are, and how we can kind of evolve the tank role going into at least Endwalker and maybe a little bit forward. And so when we talk about tanks, let's talk about this first. What are the main points? What do we want to review? When we think of tanks in an MMO in Final Fantasy XIV, what are the points that we care about when we talk about tanks?
Well, it depends. Let's take a step back. How about we lead up with
Sure.
with what led us into Shadowbringers, because I think that tanking was a lot more engaging before this expansion.
Okay, so explain that. Why was it more engaging?
Okay, so tanking in past expansions was all about if you could position correctly, stance properly, and I'll go into that in a second, and work your mitigation tools in such a way that, you know, everybody's taking as little damage as they can, you're taking as little damage as you can. We had variants like crit auto attacks. So stancing was something that existed before, and nowadays you'll think of it like, I don't have Defiance on, I'm not going to get aggro. But before it actually did things, either you got more HP, or you took less damage at the cost of a GCD to turn your stance on, or you know, you just took it off because you're ready to kill the boss, and you're like, all right, I have enough enmity, I don't need this. We're ready to do a lot of damage. Or we have a ninja. Ninjas used to have enmity control that they could give to people, take away from others, and every job had a little bit of stuff that they could do to take that away. And now Frosty as a paladin main and Zheph as a paladin main, I'm sure at some point y'all have used cover effectively because somebody else was second in aggro, right?
So good.
And that actually used to be a strategy. That was like a legitimate tactic. Take Final Omega, for example. You would explicitly on paladin not take aggro, not turn your stance on. You would have the warrior as the main tank, and like the bard or somebody would take second in aggro, and then they could use their enmity dump later on, and you could force the tank buster in such a way that the paladin could always cover the second hit instead of doing some janky swap with all kinds of cooldowns. That doesn't really exist as easily anymore, especially not in a party finder setting. So a lot of the ingenuity and like complexity behind how to tank, I feel, has just been super watered down. Nowadays, it's, do you have your tank stance on? Great. Are you positioning the boss properly? It's going to jump back to middle in like 10 seconds, whatever. It's fine. Are you doing your swaps? Well, it's forced. We have to swap here, so there's not really a choice. I remember being very mad at Midgard Zormer for doing that to us, where we didn't get a choice. And now it seems like that's just the way you play the game. And I hope that going into Endwalker, we get a little bit of complexity back, but I feel like that's gonna just get easier and easier. Zeph, you're a paladin main. How do you feel about those points, or your own thoughts?
Well, you pretty much named off every single point I was going to bring up, actually. So maybe to talk about something, or bring something in that you didn't touch on, the beginning of the Bosnian Southern Front, there were, so we didn't know anything when we were going into there. There were those star mobs that are like above rank 5 mobs, so they hit really hard, they take a lot of damage, as in they soak a lot of damage. I remember we went in there with a regular party, so 2 tanks, 2 healers, 4 DPS, and we're like, oh hey, there's this star mob, let's try killing it. And it completely wrecked us. We ended up going back, we were strategizing just for a star mob, which in the end you could just use death on, so that took that away. But we were fighting this thing, and we were having to cycle our cooldowns effectively, and when one tank ran out of cooldowns, we would have to swap to the other one, and then they would cycle their cooldowns, and then we sort of had it set up so just as the tanks started to die because they're out of cooldowns, it was just time for the other tank to take over again. And that's something that we don't really... I mean, that sort of existed in Stormblood, where you wanted to cycle between cooldowns, between tanks, because it was sort of more about... Your cooldowns were used more to reduce auto attack damage, and you wanted to have just enough for a tank buster. That's sort of how you made lives easy for the healers. But that doesn't really exist anymore. These days, it's just, as long as you survive the buster, responsibility's gone. It's going to be the other tank now for the next couple of minutes until the next buster forces it back onto you.
Unless
I
you're
would
a paladin
like to see us go back to
in E12S.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, we even took critical variants back then too, right? So that we had to use our cooldowns for auto attacks, because something like God Kefka during Trines, you were afraid for your life.
Yeah, anytime the healers were occupied. Like even Suzaku, for example, I remember a funny Arthur's clip where he was describing the way on the rotation mechanic, like the bird lighting up the floor tiles as it goes around, and he was pointing out how as a tank, if you don't cooldown there, the healers are busy staring at the mechanic around the outside of the arena that they're not looking at your health, and they just let you die. So it's actually, that was responsibility you felt to yourself as a tank back then to use cooldowns there, because the healers are ignoring it. They're not paying attention.
That's a good
I think
point.
also like in Stormblood back then, say in O3S, Halicar Nessus, like we had way more tools back then, like awareness, for example. We had to pop that earlier, like pre-pull it, so that we can cover.
Yeah, I remember doing that. I had it in my pre-pull macro. I think it was 10 seconds pre-pull or something like that.
Yeah, 10 seconds
yeah.
pre-pull. And I actually took people through that fight recently. I took some new raiders through because they were like, I've never done that fight. And then after they were like, oh my God, this was so cool. Why aren't fights like this anymore? And I was like, I know.
I agree.
It's so good.
Like back then, aggro was like, to me, aggro was like a party responsibility, right? Like it wasn't just the tanks. If the tanks wanted to be in DPS stance all the time, you needed like a ninja to help out, or you needed your DPS if they were actually doing damage. They had to pop diversion, right?
Well, the ads hurt, and there were ads.
Yeah,
there were other things to
yep.
tank.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about Enmity, because that is a big part of tanking, which is aggro, you know, in other games, just in general term, it's like the tank keeping the focus of the boss and just trying to manage that as this little secret meter to make sure no one else just dies because they can't take the hits. So when we're talking about that, it used to be where we had a tank stance where you wouldn't be in that tank stance if you wanted to do more damage, right? It was one of those things, and warriors were, you know, they had this perfect situation where they could start a fight in tank stance and ignore their tank stance, and they were like main tanks because it was just...
And it wasn't a GCD to switch, unlike the other two tanks.
Yeah.
It was
Well, Dark Knight could switch it off for free. They just couldn't turn it on.
You're right.
So Dark Knights could still start the fight. It would just be harder for them to pick it up halfway through.
And they deleted that whole mindset and thought and extra bit of work that tanks had to do and just made it to where you just turn on the tank stance. You just leave it on. There's no reason to turn it off. The only reason you turn it off is if the other tank is weaker than you and is not provoking, and you need to make sure they keep the boss.
Yeah, it's only if... I mean, yeah, so gear difference is pretty much the main reason why you would turn it off. So it's not always the other tank's fault.
No,
like
it's always
if
the
you
other
have
tank's
even gear
fault,
and if you have equal gear and they're doing less damage, then yeah, okay, you might need to consider turning it off. But oftentimes it's just a gear difference. You're doing more damage. You're actually just creeping up on enmity. So you just have to watch out for that.
Which is usually fixed with a shirk. And like there's just so many other tools you can. So if both tanks know what they're doing, it's like completely not even a thing that you think about. I thought about it in Party Finder some,
any tank
but that's
can
about
provoke
it.
in their opener. Like Paladin and Warrior have a very early weave slot. Dark Knight might have to wait a little bit, but every tank that pulls can provoke at some point in their opener.
Yeah. It just gives that extra little enmity, and you don't have to worry about anything. It's just so simple. So I guess like it doesn't even make sense why we have tank stance anymore. I mean, why do we? They could just take it away. Maybe that's what Endwalker will do. Maybe they will just take away tank stance. No. We just don't even think about it.
And pass it on to our GCDs. I really don't want that to happen, but
I mean, what the only purpose it's making right now is to turn it off with that gear difference just to make sure you don't creep up with enmity. But that can be managed in so many other ways. It's just such a pointless factor in the game at the moment. And I feel like it would be a lot more interesting if they did try to go back to the day where it mattered and enmity mattered. I think that's all they would have to do is just make it to where you do more damage again, like it did before. Just do more damage, and you do less damage when you have tank stance on, and then they would fix the issue, right? And that would be it.
Yeah, I think the primary reason, and I don't think this will come as a surprise to anybody, that they removed tank stance, it raised the skill floor, but it kind of lowered the skill ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, it actually made progression more difficult. Let's take, for example, people go down, and I need to stay alive right now while people are rezzing, and I'm on Warrior. and I have an inner release window coming up, I'm going into Defiance. I am going into Inner Beast windows, and I am not going to die. I'm gonna, because it was active cool, right? You traded Fellcleave for Inner Beast, which gave you 20% reduction. You used it on one target, and then you got 20% reduction. It was just a free Rampart. And if you had like an inner release window, you just snap those back to back, and you were not going to die. And the other tanks having passive mitigation as well. I think even Dark Knights a long time ago, they traded what they got Blood Price in Grit, which gave them like mana return when hit or something, which allowed them to use other abilities like Abyssal Drain. They could Dark Arts that to gain health back. There's just a lot of tools that we don't have anymore. And sure, it's easier for new tanks coming into it to not have to think so much. But I feel like if you put a little time into tanking, you don't have to think too much already, because rotations, like a lot of new tanks. I'm going to talk about this for a moment. So new players coming into the game, it's a big surprise that they learn that tanks and healers are DPS, right? Everybody's a DPS in this game. You got to do it. You got to do it. However, I'm going to take my glasses off to be real with you. Don't focus on your rotation, because by the time you go into an instance for the first time on tank, with maybe the exception of a couple rotational switches that paladins do, you should know your rotation. Okay, you are in the fight doing a couple of different things. You are positioning the boss properly. You are getting your mitigation down properly. You are making sure that everybody else is having an easy of a time as they can, right? You don't want casters and healers to have to move too much. Think of like Shiva Savage, where you move for axe kick and sidekick. You're not turning the boss a whole lot of wiggle room, because you're trying to get your melees to keep their positionals. If you have a Dragoon, you can see which positional they're on their buff bar. But other than that, it comes down to your proficiency. And if you're staring at your hotbar and you're like, how do I do more damage? How do I do more damage? I'm a good tank because I pressed 1, 2, 3. That is not the correct thing to focus on. That should already be, I'm not saying it's bad, it's like not something important, but you should go in already knowing what to do. And one day, Frosty's going to do his job quest to unlock Passage of Arms. I rest my case.
What?
Passage of Arms. I don't know what you're talking about.
I went all in Storm without getting Passage of Arms, because I knew that once I unlocked it, people would ask me to channel it. And the reference behind that, for those of you, like Zeph and Frost, you both remember Passage of Arms wasn't just an instant apply to everybody. You had to sit there and wait for it to activate on people.
I thought it was still like that for a while into Shadowbringers, to be honest with you. And I was treating it like that. I was like, why would I even fucking use this? And then I was told one day by someone watching the stream that I should be popping that because it will stay
just
on.
Tap it and move.
Yeah. That's the one bad thing that I've been bad on, is keeping up with what they change in the game. Like, because there'll be like moments in Final Fantasy XIV where my focus is not 100% on Final Fantasy XIV, and it's somewhere else, and I don't read all the patch notes, and I don't see all the little bullet points, and then later down the line, I'm like, hey, let me try out this job, and it doesn't work at all like I remember it, and all these different abilities are different. When I was healing with Scholar back in Heaven's Word, God, what was this real stupid thing I did back then? I didn't know about crits and shields with Scholar.
Oh.
And so I kind of... I forgot what I was doing in particular, but I was doing something real stupid to not get those extra crit shields up, but that was so long ago. Anyways, complete tangent. I did want to talk about, if we were going to go back to that, there is one point, Devil's Advocate. In Stormblood, it really was just don't use your tank stance. Right? If you had it on, you were doing something wrong, or your group was doing something wrong. In most cases,
unless
right?
you were in early progression. I feel like that's where it's sort of early progression, or let's say you're in a party finder, and again, this circles back to gear. You're under geared. Like, if I know at the beginning when samurais didn't have any enmity control, I had to have tank stance on, because our samurai got like best in slot like week 1. He got like every drop from every floor, and the drops then were random. So you either got a Dragoon piece or you got like a healer piece or something. It wasn't just a coffer that you opened up.
Right.
So when you have somebody just wailing on the enmity list like that, you do need your tank stance for the modifier, because even like if you don't have a ninja, it was really difficult. But yeah, early progress. I think progression. Like I'm speaking from a prog mindset. I appreciate tank stances, but yeah, in farm and stuff, if you're going into like, you're just like in party find, you're like, I want to just kill O11S, or I'm just gonna go fight Siryu. you're not using your tank stance.
Yeah, eventually you didn't. I mean, I used it, and I was always given shit every time I used it by people looking from the outside. But I played at a very casual level, so it was like I needed that extra little bit of defense and control and everything else. I don't know. Is there any ideas besides just bringing tank stance back to kind of how it was in Stormblood to make Enmity more interesting going into Endwalker?
I think
Enmity, there isn't too much they can do, I think, right? Zeph, what do you got?
Well, it's more of a game design problem, I think, where it's difficult when you've made things easier to then reimpose something more difficult on the player base. Especially when you have a game with such a large casual player base as Final Fantasy, majority casual player base, it can be difficult to try and push perceived more difficult changes back onto so many people when they've gotten used to things becoming easier for them.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Sauce, I agree.
You brought up Halicarnassus, right?
What's that, sorry?
Yes.
So Sauce, you brought up Halicarnassus, and that is a fight where we did need tank stance at multiple points because there were a lot of ads, right? What are your thoughts on tank stance? Do you think we could see more ads in fights, or more situations where there's like Neo X Death where Enmity resets and we have to control it more at more points other than just the opener?
Me, because I started the game in Stormblood and I was a really big fan. I'm still a really big fan of how tanking used to be back then. I wasn't a fan of the GCD tank stance, but if they could make it smoother for every tank, I'm fine with just having that come back.
Keep it OGCD.
So keep
everyone.
Keep it how we're toggling now, but give us the old benefits.
Exactly.
Okay. I think that's a good point, because we knew going into Shadowbringers the situation and what they were doing and everything else. We just didn't know how we'd feel about it, I guess, at the end. We're still kind of disappointed, it sounds like. Right? We're still
it's hard to tell people that tanking is fun and engaging when they've taken out most of the fun and engagement. Yeah. So now the complexity comes into strategies and fights, like take Shiva, for example, when you had to do isolate, and if your healers would Asuna you and you could gap close properly, that was cool. Or sliding in phase 1 of E12S where you get your uptime, but that's something all the melees do. So I feel like tank specific things, very little nowadays. Very little.
Yeah. And when it comes to like endgame content, like to me, like fine, the homogenization of tanks was okay to bring newer players to try it, but if we're talking endgame content, to me, I'm thinking we're level 80. This is the end game. We should have like more complexity than this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's true.
Yeah, and
that's actually.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, it brings up a really good point, Sauce. I just made an analogy in my head as you were saying that. So Sauce and I are actually tanking together for T reprog right now for a few people, and if you think about it, in many ways, it's the flow of tanking, isn't it? We're starting with very complex things we're doing in Living Liquid, and then on BJCC we're gonna have some pretty interesting movements, and we're gonna be engaged together, and then we're gonna hit Alexander Prime. And it goes down to you, kitchen sink. All right, now I'll you. Yep. All right, you're using your invuln, I'll use my invuln, and it goes from being really, really difficult to deadpan stop, very easy, just swap.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's another thing. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, who is the Brute Justice tank between the two of you?
Reached it yet?
We are the Brute Justice tank.
Oh, okay. So you must be doing uptime strats then.
Yeah, we're doing the one that I developed in Last Impression, where essentially the bosses are in the center.
Okay, fair enough.
And we'll just
that's more interesting.
It's
the traditional way of tanking Brute Justice. Yeah, the traditional way of tanking Brute Justice wasn't the most interesting thing. No. Just standing. You were I was described as a coat hanger because I would just stand there and people would come by, they'd be like, here, hold this, and they give me a lightning debuff. And then I just stand there for 30 seconds and someone comes by later, thanks. And they just take it off me.
And then flare thrower just gets put behind, like the water just automatically gets put behind you. Yeah. Like, don't think about it.
That sounds.
Yeah, now we're gonna have some thinking. We're gonna do some nice tank swaps, and we're actually going to. And this is something people could think about as a tank, so it's relevant to this conversation. When you're thinking about what you could do for the party, one thing we're gonna do is it comes up on the water lightning pass. We're gonna pass a DPS is gonna give a lightning to a tank, then the tanks are gonna give it to the other tank, and then so Sauce is gonna begin with BJ, and he's gonna provoke Cruise Chaser, and he's gonna use every cooldown he has. Because he's got double autos, and I could spread my cooldowns out later for other things like the ice and the mines. And little optimizations like that people don't innately think about. Because I feel like nowadays when you're tanking, because there's such little responsibility, you think, what can I do for me? What can I do to survive? You know, heck that other guy. Intervention. I'm getting my Sheltron swipe proc right now.
Intervention's always the last thing for me. I'm like, the last thing I think about is how I can help this other douche look better, right?
Absolutely.
Well, the sad thing about Paladin is the gauge cost on cover now as well. Because if you want to play Paladin effectively, you're using intervention every chance you get. You're using Sheltron every chance you get, which means when something goes wrong, you go, oh, that's okay. I'll just cover them. Oh wait, I don't have gauge anymore because I've been playing well,
Or
so I can't use this main thing. Yeah, or if you died and you can't help recover the situation afterwards.
I don't want to talk too much about Paladin, because I feel like I'm going to just get in and be the Paladin show, because like that's where most of my experience
in a lot of ways, though. I think that's important, don't you? Paladin is so. Let's take a look at progression of how tanks' quality of life has changed. Paladins have a gap closer now.
Yeah.
How long did you wait for that?
That was a very long time, but they took my cover. I mean, it's still there, but what do I do? What do I use?
You don't.
No, you use intervention. Why would you take damage when you could just prevent some extra damage and be done with it?
Exactly.
So,
and here was me, okay? Warrior, very excited. Yay! What is this all people button? HP skip.
I don't want it anymore.
So what do? They take away the HP cost, full potency. Paladins are like, I've had to deal with this since A Realm Reborn. What if Spirits Without? And they still have an HP scale on Spirits Within, with no regen on their 1, 2, 3.
And it's
Storm's Path, Brutal Shell, we all have HP regen. And then Paladins are like, I'm the tankiest tank. Really? Can you recover your own HP? If I break my combo. Okay, great. Do any of your abilities just do really strong damage, like the healthier you are? No, they do less damage if I get weak, and so I don't want to tank. Please take this shield.
That's literally, that's it. It's Spirits Within, and you're like, hey, no, well, I guess you're the off tank. All right, that makes sense. And are my cooldowns too long? I guess I can't use my invuln twice on this fight. I guess someone else will tank and take most of the invulns, right? And so,
whoa! Please stop complaining. Your sentinel was reduced from 3 minutes to 2.
And its strength was reduced from 40 to 30.
But when I use my sentinel, I do return damage to the enemy. So, Paladins, I feel, have gotten a really raw end of the deal. But here's where the next part of the conversation comes in, right? In Endwalker, do we want more homogenization or less? Because it seems like there's a very, very big black sheep in there.
Always less. But that's because we play the game like all the time, and we want fresh new stuff all the time. I mean, it's not probably what the best decision is for the game, but I feel like it's the best decision for me as a player. Yeah, I want homogenization, but what cost? Or no, sorry, I don't want homogenization, but what cost does that actually have on the rest of the game? It means that one of these jobs is going to fall behind at some point, because they can't keep up with balance if they don't try to make it kind of close in most similar concepts, right? And I'm okay with that. I get shit for it all the time. A12S Paladin tank, so it's
3 like all of Paladin, right? For Heaven's Ward, they were a physical defense tank.
There's a few where the physical damage was actually beneficial, that a Paladin was actually tanking because of the way that they handle it, but it was so minuscule that no one complained if you weren't a Paladin, right? If you were in A12S as a Paladin, it was just complained about. You're just screwing your healers over, and that's what it was. Luckily, one of the healers was my wife, and she was okay with it.
You're missing What did Dark Knights put up back then for their magic mint?
Their magic mitigation? They had tons, right?
No, I mean they had the equivalent of Dragon Kick, right? That debuffed the boss, and they took it was like Rage of Blown, but for magic.
I can't remember what it was called.
And I remember that was pretty important too.
Was it
Like, Storm's
reprisal?
Path.
Was
But
that
monks
reprisal
could
at
do
the
that
time? I
too.
can't remember.
But no, I don't think it was reprisal. But monks could do that too. No, I don't think reprisal did that. Did reprisal do that?
Maybe I don't remember, but we all know
Reprisal
something exists.
wasn't what it is now. Reprisal
No,
was
no.
changed and given to all tanks in
Reprisal
Shadowbringers.
now used to be an Astro ability.
Reprisal used to be a Dark Knight only.
Yeah, it was
Delirium?
Dark Knight only. Reprisal
Yes,
was Dark Knight.
it was Dark Knight.
Yeah, it was Dark Mind. Okay. But monks had that as well. So that was like if you didn't have a Dark Knight, you needed a monk. They came in and did their thing to get cancel the magic damage. But and I mean back then in those days, what job you were playing mattered, right?
A lot.
It mattered a lot.
You bring a ranged and you don't bring a dragoon.
Oh, Samurai came out. My Dragoon was like, "Yeah, I'm going to play Samurai." Bard was like, "No, you're not."
Or I ain't playing.
Yeah. I'm not playing. So I had to make some special deal where some days he'd play Dragoon and some days he wouldn't, just to make the Bard happy.
Then you get a 2-target boss, right? And as a paladin, you're like, I need the ninja on my boss because I need slashing.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then you're like, well, now we need a warrior because we don't have a ninja, so we ain't running Paladin Dark Knight. Sauce, did you only play one tank last expansion?
Last expansion verse. I think I tried.
No, I mean in Stormblood. In Stormblood.
Expansion. No, I started with Paladin actually. I started in Deltascape. I played Paladin for a little bit. I came back for Sigmascape, and that was my experimental phase where I tried like Caster and Paladin, Warrior.
The swords touched a little bit. Everybody has that phase in Sigmascape.
Yeah, exactly.
Ulu comes out right after.
Mm-hmm.
And then Alphascape, I met you in that learning party at Warrior, and that was
Then you started playing tank.
Yeah, pretty much.
Then you began tanking. Like Warrior,
Real
nice. All right, so then, since Sauce, you've played everything this expansion, right? Do you think the job complexity and balance is better now or better then?
I think it was better because a lot of things were homogenized, right? Like in this expansion. My hope is that because fine, it was already complex in its own way back in Stormblood. Like everyone's rotations were completely different. Ninjas' mudras were completely different. You know, like there was a DPS stance that people or the tanks had to try to switch into if they wanted to continue doing more damage. Like there was complexity in everything. So for me, my hope is that Square Enix is just kind of making like a soft reset. This is me being like completely like
Your
trying
glass
to be
is
positive
completely
about
full.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm trying to be positive about this. Like a lot of people think that it's gonna get even easier from here, but like for me, I'm just hoping. I'm holding on to that last bit of hope that they're going to just soft reset to the system we have now, just to get more people to play the game, and then you know when we get to 90, they will make it complex again. You know.
That's what I was hoping for as well. Like maybe, just maybe, that tiny bit of hope that they're taking things away so they can re-add them later. Like I'm not really a fan of if that is what they're doing, I'm not really a fan of the idea of giving us a whole 3 years of less complexity and having to deal with that just so they can re-add it later. Because Square Enix doesn't. They're not known for making incremental changes like mid-expansion. Like sometimes they'll do a couple of balancing reworks, maybe a rework if it's really needed, which in the end, like if we look at Monk, was not that drastic of a change to the play style. It was more like quality of life stuff. But yeah, I'm hoping that we can go back to the days of a little more complexity, and maybe just Shadowbringers was a single step in changing the sort of fundamental design. So it won't be what it was before, but maybe it will be similarly complex, maybe not as much, but similar, just in a different way in the future. So I'm with Sausage on that one. Hopefully that's the direction it's going.
So before we go too much into all that and the future and which direction it can go, let's go back a little bit to reviewing what we have in hand, right? Let's hit all the elements of things that are currently here, and so we can kind of analyze maybe what will be good in the future. So we talked a little bit about the variation, the jobs. Right now, there's no real variation within your jobs except for the I guess the invulns, right?
Yeah, well, and that goes back to what you're saying about Heavensward, where like people really didn't want a paladin, right? So they had. I think that had to change. That homogenization needed to happen. You couldn't have a magic tank and a physical tank.
I mean, there's levels of it. There's levels of it, though. Right. I mean, play style.
Like now Dark Knight gets Dark Mind, and Gunbreaker gets Camo, and they both work in their respective ways. And I think that's probably the perfect difference, where we have a little bit that they could do extra.
Right.
I sort of think of those as the secondary cooldowns. So each tank has 20% in Rampart, 30%. It's effectively the same thing. The name doesn't matter. And then on top of that, they have their unique smaller cooldowns that are helpful, but not so significant that you're sort of looking at one and going, "Oh, I wish I was the other tank, so I had this instead." Like it's sort of a convenience thing more than rather than absolutely needing it. I feel like the only tank that's really missing that is Paladin, because that utility sort of comes in the form of intervention and cover, which are not for yourself, it's for others. And so Paladin is sort of the odd one out, missing the sort of personal mitigation, whereas all the other tanks have that little bit of something. So you have TBN, you have Nascent Flash / Raw Intuition, Nascent being amazing, by the way. And then you also have Camouflage and Heart of Stone, which can be used on self, not just others.
Paladin also gets the extra party mitt too. So they're the party tank, right? Because they have Veil and Paladin.
Yeah, they're utility tank. They're like the one tank that absolutely does not want to be tanking the boss. They want it as little as possible.
So what they should do is they should take it to where get rid of that whole spirits within nonsense with maybe base it on something else, try to figure out some other gimmick with that, and put clemency on an OGCD. And you could always, because currently right now you don't need 100% of your mana to do a full rotation, right? If you do a full rotation, you could probably squeeze in one clemency.
You have one free clemency per loop.
So if they made that an OGCD, that would
be 2 with the rotation adjustment.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that would be a perfect addition for Paladin, because then they could free heal themselves or anyone else. Right?
You still keep the cost though, right? Still have the clemency cost as it exists. Just make it an OGCD.
Yeah, just make it an OGCD. Okay. And if you do it during your rotation where you have that extra damage going off with Request a Cat, you could do that and time it to be perfect for different variations of what the fight would do. You could heal. This party member is going to take a little bit of extra damage, so just throw that out.
How about going one further? And this will kind of raise the skill floor while also keeping the ceiling up. What if you could do that and then you gained mana when you block? So now you have to plan your Sheltrons out, or ignore them and just get free stuff. Yeah. Because we used to have to think about Sheltron, right? You're like, I'm going to stand on this bad thing because I'm not going to die and I really need this damage right now.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing for Paladin's rotation because you need that MP in order to do your Requiescat once per minute. I remember working this out when we first got the changes in Shadowbringers. They took out a lot of MP generation, so you don't get it from Sheltron anymore. You also don't get it from party sources. So Refresh doesn't exist anymore. Also, Mana Shift doesn't exist anymore either. And there is a very particular situation where if Paladin ends a phase on Requiescat, which you ideally want to be doing because you're ending a phase on your burst, and then you're going into downtime, if that downtime lasts exactly 25 to 30 seconds, then you will not be able to get enough MP back for your next Requiescat. So your rotation just doesn't work. And there's no way to get it because Sheltron doesn't give it to you anymore.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, these are little tiny differences they could make within the jobs to give them those unique situations that is a little bit less homogenized and adds that little bit of extra skill level and a little bit more interesting without making it horrible to develop the fights and make every single character better or less. And I think if they make these small adjustments, not just with Paladin, but the other jobs as well, they could probably knock a lot of this stuff out and make people happy without making it really... Because that's not going to make it that much more difficult, right? a new player is going to be like, okay, I can do my rotation. He doesn't throw up a clemency, probably fucking okay, right? It's just that one.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, complexity is, I think complexity or a high skill ceiling like that is fine if it's not required. So for the most part, in this game, as long as you do sort of the bare minimum damage, like even if you're doing 75% of another tank, I'd say you're still doing a reasonable amount of damage. It's usually only if you're like way down that it starts to become a problem for Enrage, especially if you have multiple people in the party that are doing that. But for the most part, you can do okay and you'll get by and no one will bat an eye. And then on top of that, like when you decide to try and get a little bit better, then you start to open up this realm of possibilities of other things you can do and other things you can start to think about. And I think Shadowbringers sort of took a lot of those things away from us, which is what we'd like to see coming back.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Like even tank swaps because of mechanics, right? Take a Guardian and Omega, for example. You didn't swap because you're out of cooldowns and you needed to. You swapped because a mechanic was forcing you to the edge of the arena and you had to change that the boss didn't move that much. And that type of complexity and like on the fly decision making literally doesn't exist anymore. That's just not a thing.
Yeah. So we don't have those types of tank swaps anymore. Like tank swaps for convenience rather than, haha, you've got a Vol now, you can't take the boss anymore, give it to the other guy.
No.
And then if the other guy messes up, you're dead too, so it's wipe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing you were talking about moving a boss around, we should probably hit on that a little bit too, because not all of the, tank review that we're doing is just on the jobs and how they're developed themselves. It's also within the fight and how the fights are designed to make it interesting to tank. And the easiest thing is boss movement. That's the easiest thing to refer to make it more interesting for for the tanks. I mean, also we could talk about the enmity and everything else that kind of hits both sides a little bit. But boss movement, I think, does tons for tank enjoyment. And knowing exactly where you can position it and what you can do to make it better. One of my favorite fights in this game of this expansion was the second fight, Voidwalker.
Voidwalker?
Yeah.
Oh,
I love Voidwalker.
Because that was
also like
me too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was perfectly designed for positioning a boss, right? Because you could move it pretty much wherever you want it to, and depending on where you put it, you could fuck over a DPS because they would have to run out of their circle, run back in, all that stuff for all the mechanics. And I feel like that at least had in mind of how we're going to make this interesting for tanks. I don't, and it was a huge wall, but it wasn't a wall for the positional. The positionals didn't make it. Where you're positioning a boss didn't make it a big wall for people. It was really that last set of mechanics that killed people. And
when you're going into the double flares and then the cycles and stuff. Yeah.
But we didn't see them apply that same logic going forward for a lot of the bosses. I mean, what other bosses really required movement?
They reversed the logic. Look at Shadowkeeper. The dog, you get punished for pulling it out of place. Yeah. And there are points where and this sucks for Paladin because you could find yourself out of a window, or you could find yourself in wreck, or it sucks for Warrior if you don't have the gauge. But if she did Throne of Shadows where she stands up and does a massive AoE, she'll step towards the main tank if they don't gap close right back in, and then that could totally screw things up for people.
Yep. And so I guess that was part of the positioning difficulty. Was like, how center can I keep this boss, right? How can I prevent them?
I guess the bosses are off the arena right. Leviathan, you have Titan Maximum, you have E7S. There's just a lot of bosses right now that literally don't matter, right? Because they're just, they're so large or so off the side, Eden Prime did a lot of teleporty stuff around too, but you could bait. Like it would jump to a corner, the furthest corner away, so you could bait that as a tank. That was cool. And then a lot of positioning middle. Voidwalker, you got to freely move. Leviathan was just off the arena. Titan was pretty cool because you could do a lot of uptime things based on the tiles. That was awesome. And then the second phase, you didn't really have that. And then the third phase, you got to do it again. And triple melee was really fun for that. And then T, positioning really matters. Then you have Ramu. Doesn't really matter. There is a trick that you were able to do at the beginning of the fight for a Stratosphere uptime, but very few tanks did that. I think Sauce did it.
It was also the knockback as well.
Oh,
pulling it,
yes.
Pulling it past where the melees would want to be standing, so they can hit the rear of the boss.
On the knock. Yeah. That was actually Ramu positioning was pretty cool. And that showed there was a lot of growth that happened that tier. Sauce, you gunbreakered Ramu, right?
I tried. Yes.
Okay. So you're going to you might remember that the part that a lot of gunbreakers complained about, and this is what made a good gunbreaker apart from a bad one, was right after Fury's 14, you had a job to pull it back from the wall to the middle of the arena for chain lightning, and you were in a No Mercy Gnashing Fang.
Yeah. I remember
So if you didn't utilize Sprint or Burst Strike, you were just like shit out of luck. And so many people were like, I can't main tank here because Gunbreaker can't do the movement. And that's a moment where you're like, wow, you're privileged. Go back in time 4 years.
I do have a tip regarding that though, because Gunbreakers can move the boss pretty effectively, but the biggest mistake you can make if you're in Gnashing Fang is that you try and move after your Gnashing Fang OG City. So the way I do it is I treat my Gnashing Fang as a second weave. So I put it into the second weave slot, and the first weave is the movement. So you hit the GCD, you run away immediately, you come back and you do a second weave Gnashing Fang, and then your next GCD. Because if you wait for your Gnashing Fang, you're basically waiting for latency. So you have to wait for your GCD to go through, then you have to wait for your OGCD to go through before you can move. And you get barely any time before your GCD is coming around again. Whereas if you hit the boss, instead of waiting for the OGCD due to latency, you spend that time running away instead. The boss will leash towards you, and then you come back, you hit the OGCD, because now there's no latency. Like, it's not waiting on any animation or anything. You definitely are going to get the OGCD the moment you press it in the second weave slot, and then you go into your next GCD. So you do that every GCD. You can actually fairly reasonably move the boss as a gunbreaker.
You made it way harder than it needs to be.
Yeah.
I was going to say, all you have to do is Sonic Break or Burst Strike in between your gnashing.
Short of those two things. Because, like, let's say you're not in No Mercy. Let's say you're just doing Gnashing Fang. Then yes. But obviously, you can optimize your movement around.
That's where complexity came in too, and I did that on Voidwalker. That's where Gunbreakers have... So everybody's like, why can't you just tell me the exact GCD rotation I should do for this fight? Paladins have spreadsheets. And I'm like, I teach you the tools so that you can enable these situations. Voidwalker, you're going to have to run to the side, and you know you're in Gnashing Fang, pocket the extra cartridge. Save it for the Burst Strike. I like doing that kind of optimization personally. But again, Sauce, a much better tank than I am. So what are your thoughts on it, my dude?
You guys covered
movement and stuff.
You guys covered most, at least for Gunbreaker. You guys covered most of it. I also just like to throw it out there too. Rough Divide's your friend while you move. After you do a GCD and you run and you Rough Divide, it moves further. Like the boss targets you further than
it's slingshot.
Any tank can do it.
It tries to go
every
where
tank
you
can
want.
do that.
Exactly.
Except for
and I think people
Warrior
should do that.
gets a little bit of a deficit. It goes potency neutral, but you don't want to do too many, or you won't have it for the burst.
Yeah.
But where we are
Warrior
right
also
now,
doesn't
Frosty,
worry
with
about
movement
weaving.
and stuff, I will also say that job homogenization is in the wrong places. Not just with movement and what you could do on, because as I said, movement can punish you in fights too, right? But depending on the situations too, it's not as much as it used to be, but people will not want warriors in their parties if you're a bard or a dragoon or anybody with crit, right? So that is a part where you're like, great, that part's not homogenized. And because of that, they did it in just the wrong way. Like you automatically direct a crit, you are actively punishing the other people in your party. So if we get some sort of thing going forward where they make changes, I want it to be in such a way that it's still beneficial for everybody.
Yeah.
I do want to be clear real quick. Usually I do play Devil's Advocate in different ways. And I do it so well that I just look like an idiot half the time. But I 100% Frosty supports jobs being bad and shitty and other jobs being good. I want them to be so different that you're like, okay, well, I need to play this tank instead of this tank on this fight. And this tank is just more enjoyable on this fight. Because I feel like that's another level of interesting.
I agree with that too. I just want Warrior to be different in a different way.
Okay.
What it is right now is just a very black and white choice. Does this grief raid buffs? Yes. And then that's it. That's the complexity. You can't shift it around or you're going to lose windows and you're going to lose other buffs. So you don't really have a choice other than to say like, screw you guys. And that's it. So I'm okay with it being shitty because it was king for like 6 years. Just in a different way.
So, I mean, what they're doing a lot with what it seems like the homogenization is all going into the role abilities, right? And so they just make it to where those role abilities are the crucial ones, and that role is supposed to play that. But we have 5 roles now, right? So you have to have one of every role in there. Because the ranged physical and ranged magical bring their own things, I guess, right? Actually, I don't even know. How different are the role abilities for those two roles?
Well, you get Troubadour, Samba, and Tactician do all mitigation,
The fizz
right?
range
And then
stuff,
casters
yeah.
only get magic mid. And they get res if you're not a black mage.
Oh, yeah. And magical, high damage crazy. They res you. And it's important to have them in your party. But anyways, this is the tank show. So with that, we all, I assume, feel there needs to be more emphasis on tank movement with bosses and everything else. And that is a highlight for tanks. It's not something that, it's a difficulty that people may complain about. Oh, this sucks. This is hard. I hate moving the boss. But it's a taste of puzzle, right? It's part of the challenge of playing the game. And it's not a bad, unenjoyable thing, because once you get it down, man, it feels so good. You feel so skilled. It's just like this fluid movement going back and forth, and you're not upset by it. You just have to learn it. And it's not a horrible thing to learn either. It's usually you're not horribly punished with the boss movement. You just piss a couple people off, and eventually you figure it out, and you make it work. Some people die sometimes, but then you learn it.
Yep. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Because if you don't do good tank movement, it's not necessarily going to kill everyone unless you do something in a really bad way, but that doesn't really happen. But like, if you leave the boss middle when it's more beneficial to pull it to the edge, people can still deal with it. You're just inconveniencing people, but you're not going to ruin everything. But yeah, so there's a reason why I very specifically liked tanking Eden's Verse, so the second tier, so much, because there were so many things that tanks could do that tier. So you have Ramu. Well, at least as a paladin off tank, I had a very special job which I had fun with, kiting the birds. Not a lot of people like that, but I enjoyed the extra responsibility.
I hated it as a paladin, dude. I just fucking...
I loved it.
I'm fine
as long as you didn't have a red mage, you could dance around the boss without interfering really with anybody.
It just like what happens is stupid things where it disappears in the middle of the boss and all of a sudden you're dead, right? you forget about it. But anyways, go ahead, Zeph. Sorry.
Yeah, and then so you had removed where you could pull the boss around in a couple of different ways to make things easier, and then Paladin had their own special responsibility, or the off tank rather. I was a Paladin.
Paladin and off tank, same word.
Had the benefit of hyperscats. So.
Yeah, same thing. And then you have E6 where. Phase 1, you can pull the boss out of the middle, and then you can pull it back to the middle before it jumps, so the melees aren't having the boss suddenly disappear out of range. And then Phase 2, you can the tanks can take the busters in such a way that the boss won't move. So you sort of tank swap and you put it on the same spot so the boss stays still. You can also, when Ifrit would do the eruption on the main tank, you could stand in the eruption until the very last second, and he would get position locked. And then you run behind him, and he would still be facing the other way. So the melees would get to save a true north use or whatever that they might need to use there. And then you have the 2-tank phase, where you can bring them together, and you can pre-position Ifrit towards the edge, so the melees, again, can keep full uptime. Like that whole fight, I actually thought that was a really good fight tanking-wise, except for Conflag, because that's just run away and throw range moves. I think that could have been a
was
bit of a better
downtime for no reason.
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
for literally no
just
reason.
pushed you
Other than
away.
the tanks have to do this.
It was the shake-up of like the fight where it made things not easy for like the cookie cutter, like going with your rotation and everything else. But it was an unenjoyable addition, right? It wasn't like something. I need to figure out the puzzle. It was you're just kind of fucked for a little bit.
You have to run away.
My favorite
and just
movement
do
too,
mechanic.
Zeph.
Yep.
You had the tank swap on Rock Tapasa when you could make it so the party didn't have to move through or anything. They just stay at the wall.
Oh yeah, you run.
Yeah,
You
run.
run.
like that
Swap
one.
and force
Yeah.
everybody to run. But if a good tank did it, the party stood still, and it was so good.
Yes. And
love
another
that
thing
one
about that is it was sort of phased out because we realized you could just eat a Vuln stack from the fireballs.
From the stalker,
But
yeah.
a good tank there could also identify the safe spot quickly and pull the boss to it before the boss got animation locked. So there were so many things you could do in that fight as a tank, and like you said, Frosty, it makes you feel good, makes you feel skilled, because you're like, wow, I'm actually able to do these things that make things better for my party, and maybe no one will notice, maybe they will, but I have this personal satisfaction that I did a thing. Like there is something here that I can do.
Paladin
and
is
when
king
they
in that
notice,
fight,
they
too.
die, right? Because they're like, "Oh, my tank always tanks it this way. Why didn't you tank it this way?" And then they get in the wrong position and die. It's great.
Zeph, I don't know if you got to do the speedrun tech where you cover one of your melees for the suck-in on Garuda, and you just
Yes,
hollow ground and eat it and use your cooldowns.
I did do that. I was also the beneficiary of that as well because I played it on both ends as a DPS and as the paladin.
Feels
And then
good.
E7, as much as I didn't like E7, the ads phase was interesting to tank. So it was still like overall it was a plus for tanking for the tier. And then Shiva actually had a lot of things you could do. So axe kick, scythe kick. You had scythe uptime. Like I remember the first time I figured that out, it sort of clicked in my brain, and I went, oh wait, what if I just pull it straight up to the mirror, and then we get double donuts here? Like this was when we realized that it was always going to be axe kick or scythe kick, and then the other one was always the opposite. So once we figured that out, then it opens up for scythe kick uptime, and then you have like sliding mirrors and all that sort of thing. There were so many things in that tier where I felt great as a tank because I could think ahead. Like tank that sort of tank responsibility, or in my mind, what a tank should be, is thinking ahead because you have simpler rotations than DPS. Like it's simple for a reason because you have these other responsibilities. What are those responsibilities? It should be thinking ahead. You should be taking that time doing a basic 1, 2, 3 to be thinking about what you can do in the next 30 seconds, next minute, how you position the boss to benefit the party.
Mental mapping.
Or-
Pretty
Yeah.
much.
Well,
Like
I mean,
Ramu is very stubborn, right? There were certain points where Ramu wouldn't move, so you really had to think ahead because like I have to do this now, or we don't get the opportunity. Just as one example. So you're absolutely right, and there's a lot of tanks I meet nowadays that just have less awareness than like a physical range as a meme because people always say that they have so much movement that they're not paying attention to where they need to be or the strats because it's uptime no matter what, right? So as a tank, I meet a lot of players now who just they're not thinking ahead. Sometimes they don't even think ahead enough to pop a cooldown in time for a buster. They see it and they react, which I personally think is a weakness.
And thinking ahead with a buster as well, you can figure out timing such that, like, maybe busters are a minute 50 apart, and if you reactively use your 2-minute cooldown, you won't actually get the value from that on both of them. Whereas if you realize that it's coming up and you figure out the exact moment that you can press it early, you can actually have it come off cooldown just in time for the next one, and then look, you've made the healer's life even easier. They don't have to top you up as much if you're optimizing, or you're just not going to be as low or at risk of death because of that extra cooldown.
so let's hit that a little bit. Let's hit cooldowns. And I'll ask this to Sausage here. I mean, the way that cooldowns are kind of put into the game right now, it's a core part of tanking. You're supposed to balance it. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's kitchen sink and just run. You know, it's just whatever. I don't know how much thought actually really goes into cooldowns because it doesn't feel super difficult to me from my position. I mean, there are some, like you said, where you need to kind of time it a little bit and you just get the most benefit out of it. But I feel like that's kind of rare, isn't it, Zeph? I mean, it's not like all the time. There's a few that you find those sweet spots on.
Yeah, like E12 phase 1, for example, if you use reprisal as your second weave on the second GCD, you can have that reprisal come up just before the tank buster without interfering with your other OG cities that you need to put up your cooldowns as well.
So I
Like,
wanted to ask,
it's not that common,
yeah,
but it exists.
I wanted to ask Sausage his opinion on tank cooldowns in general and how they're implemented in the game, and if there needs to be changes, maybe some ideas of things that could change on them.
For tank cooldowns, at least for this tier, I really enjoyed it because, say for example, E9S, as a main tank, you're getting trucked by a ton of damage. If you pop your cooldowns just because it's a buster, you're gonna grief everyone else. So, for example, like you'd want to pop a rampart here, and right after like the first anti-air wide angle, you want to pop something right away because that's a barrage of autos into an AoE into another set of autos again. So like for this tier, I liked how tanks who were taking the autos had to plan for that specifically. because like again, it's like a tank game. Like, you have to.
I think that matters. It feels so. I'm gonna put my shitty opinion on this. I feel like that matters a little bit. But like you always have stuff like Sheltron, or you always have some little thing that you can survive some of it. You'll make it a little bit hard for anyone else. But it always felt like a game of, hey, I use my invuln here, you use your invuln there, and then good tanks will balance out the rest of it, and if they don't, the healers have to be just a good healer to make up for it, and that's about it. That's what it felt like to me, at least. Am I wrong with that?
No, because you'll hear the feedback from healers too, like, at the beginning of the expansion, a lot of gunbreakers, and I cycle back to that a lot because I'm a gunbreaker main. A lot of healers had the perception, gunbreakers are very squishy, and even tanks like gunbreakers are very squishy. And I'm like, no, they're not. It's just you see Gnashing Fang come up, and you're ignoring any other OGCD that you could be using at that time. And it just always happened to line up in such a way where like you're gonna have weaves happening when there's something busy. Maybe the healers are preoccupied healing the party, like Zheph touched on, or maybe like Sauce just said, anti-air and stuff is coming out. People are getting back to mid. The healers are moving, and they're trying to figure out how they can do that. Sometimes they can't just afford to do extra healing because the tank decided that I'm gonna unplug my keyboard, use my mouse for a second.
I just use my invuln. It's up to the healers now.
Well, that's another thing. Gunbreaker especially is, I would say, the tank that needs to think the most about pre-using their cooldowns, because if you're only playing reactively, you will get situations where you're in the middle of a No Mercy Gnashing Fang, you've got all your OGCDs coming off cooldown, and you have to mitigate a buster, and so something has to give. And the responsible thing to do is to drop your Gnashing Fang OGCD in favor of the cooldown so you don't die. But so often players just go, oh, I just want that damage. That's 550 potency. I don't want to throw that away. And so they press the button, and then they die, and then the healers get blamed for not topping them up, when really they should have been thinking ahead and pressing a cooldown before any of that even happened.
And then the biggest tool, you're like, I know when this No Mercy came up, I got screwed. So next pull, as long as I'm pressing everything correctly, I will know that when that's coming up, I need to be ready. And for me, I think that's a huge sign. I think Gunbreaker could be one of the most powerful tanks in terms of mental mapping, because you have that 30-second roadmap that's blocking you from doing multiple weaves so frequently that you can plan around it. And you'll either be a weak Gunbreaker and be like, I just can't do this because this sucks and the fight sucks, and why would they do this? The fight sucks. And that's it. Or you could be a really strong tank and be like, this is coming up. I know I'm going to need to do this here. This is how it's going to work. This is my mental map. This is how I'm doing it. And Dark Knight has a lot of like breaks between 90 and 2 minutes too. And really anybody with good mental awareness can do that off of their timers. But I think Gunbreakers have a special tool built into their rotation to help them keep on pace. Kind of like a metronome, right? You're like, you have your Gnashing Fang coming up and you're like, all right, we're getting ready. Here's camo. And then the next thing comes up and you're just smooth.
I think of what... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's a good point Rin brings up about taking mental note when you were on your second No Mercy in the fight, for example, and you go, okay, for this one, I need to remember to press a cooldown beforehand. I think that can speak to newer tanks, that you are not expected to know what to do your first time in, because these are things we all figure out. After repeated pulls, we go pull after pull, and we figure these things out. We go, okay, this No Mercy, I need to use this cooldown here. That buff window there, I need to remember that something else is coming up that I need to handle. We don't know these things when we first go in. We figure them out over time, and it's okay to not know on your first time going into a fight. Like, if it's a learning party, no one's going to blame you. You figure these things out, and you just take mental note, and you do better next time.
So you are absolutely correct in assuming that any reasonable person would react that way and say, yeah, you're learning and everything else. But a lot of people are in Party Finder, and they like, oh, you're stupid. Why, you're an idiot. I died because of you. And it's just what it is. And so people are on this defensive stance of worrying. And I think it's good to worry. It's good to go into a fight and be like, man, I don't want people to be upset with me. Great. You know what? Just do your best, and I can tell, since you don't want people to be upset, that you're going to try to do your best, and you're going to learn from your mistakes. I'm perfectly fine with that. And, I mean, this is kind of a general topic, the hit, but it is part of just, any other role that goes in there, and they're trying to learn stuff. it's okay to fuck up and it's okay to be yelled at because those people don't fucking matter. Just, go in there, take what you can and try to make sense out of their fuck yous, you should be doing this, and clean it up and try to turn it into a logical, critical response that you could apply to yourself, and then you'll be better later on. But most reasonable people, like if Zheph or Rin's in there, they're like, okay, yeah, no, this is fine. Oh, actually, you know what? Rin's probably talking shit and making fun of them on stream. That's probably what's happening.
Making a mental note right now. Frosty is toxic.
Hey.
No, I think. Well,
go ahead.
You brought up a good point, right? If you're playing the game and you're going into Party Finder, I would like the other people matter, but you matter the most to yourself, right? Because you're in there for a reason. You're trying to maybe learn, maybe clear, get some practice. There are some people that will join Party Finder outside of their static specifically to test things they haven't tried before and see what they can and can't get away with. And sometimes that will make them look foolish, and sometimes it won't. But it's okay to make mistakes. I'm probably going to make a bunch of mistakes tonight. Sauce is still missing reprisals, and that's okay. That's okay.
Whoa.
We don't judge you, Sauce. We don't judge you. Okay, calm down. It's okay to make mistakes.
Jeez.
Sauce is a pillar of consistency. A pillar of consistency.
Yeah.
But my point is, even great players that you see and you watch, like you're gonna watch a speed kill, you're gonna watch a first time clear or something. You're gonna think, wow, they're so perfect. They don't make mistakes. Look how optimized they were on their first clear. But like Zheph said, we're spending a bunch of pulls figuring this out every single time. And sometimes we're also helping each other too, right? Like maybe Sauce and I are working together, and Sauce is like, oh, I got to turn this boss around right now because my Dragoon's going to appreciate it if I flip it right here and then move in. So like, Rin, you could remember this if you're ever doing this. And I'm like, great. And I just did this thing. So you're going to want to use this cooldown here. Take, for example, T right now. Sauce was having a situation where, the camo part, right, Sauce? I'm about to say?
I was going to mention that earlier, yeah.
Go ahead. Say it right now. You could take the helm.
So I wasn't thinking about, like, speaking of cooldowns and Gunbreaker being the planning tank, right? It goes for every other tank too. Like, for example, in T, I was thinking, hey, I have camo here. I should pop it for the autos into like the splash from the first tornado, right? But Rin told me if you pop this together, even if you're not taking autos yet, if you pop this early together with the first cleave, which is not on you, it'll come back up for the last Protean phase, which is really good because that's where I was getting trucked. I needed more than just a Heart of Stone and an Aurora to live that, And that goes for literally any other tank that's trying to help out with the damage being done on them, because that's their job, right? Your job is to tank, take as less damage as you can, and play the game.
It's half your job.
Yeah.
Sometimes maximizing uses is not the correct play. Having it in the appropriate pinch points and the choke points, that's where it matters. So like Sauce is saying, I told him to pop camo when I'm mitigating my buster, because instead of him getting 10 seconds of auto attack reduction and then not having it when he keeps dying, he can mitigate 2 autos and then have it up for the full duration where he's getting trucked. And healers are using Asuna and they're doing their own thing. So I'm like, you need to have this cooldown here. So even though it's a loss at the beginning, you're not even lethal in the beginning. So little things like that, and don't expect newbie tanks and novice tanks to get this. This is like, I would say, moderate to advanced tank tech when you're thinking about planning ahead, but it's something that you can get to. If you're thinking about it and you're working hard enough, you will get there, Frosty.
One day I will. I'll be a good tank. So I do want to ask this, and again, I'll point the sausage here for the cooldown part. A lot of cooldowns are kind of you're being proactive with your cooldowns. You're planning all this stuff out. There isn't a lot to react to. Do you think that tanks would be more enjoyable if cooldowns were something that would be more reactive in the fights?
I think the reactive cooldown that we already have is our baby cooldowns, like Heart of Stone, Nascent, Raw. That can be our reactive cooldowns. But I think it's just my opinion, and it has more to do with the fight designs. Because right now, at least the way it is now, the fight always starts with a raid wide. There are barely any random cleaves coming out, kind of like T or UCOB, right? The tanks have to plan for, plan for their cooldowns to cover it anymore. Like, it starts with a raid wide, and then there's some party group activities thing, and then a tank thing somewhere, and then the major mechanic, right? So I think it mostly has to do with the fight design. If they can figure out a way to make it more engaging for tanks, because we already have simpler rotations, like what Zeph said. We have simpler rotations compared to every other role. I guess.
I mean, so something in my head, don't know if this is a good idea or not, is to make it to where tank cooldowns, you could hit a point to where, okay, we don't know what ability they're going to do. It could be a tank cooldown. It could not be a tank cooldown. And they do it so many times in a row. And then at a certain point, you're like, oh shit, I have nothing left. I need the other tank to tank the boss. And then start using his cooldowns. And you could swap when you kind of hit that limit. But you don't know when that limit's going to happen because their abilities and their tank damage could happen at random points in the fight.
You're saying less of a scripted dance and
yeah,
more
less of a scripted dance
from a pool of abilities.
Yeah, pool of abilities, and then if it's just tank stuff overall, then eventually you're gonna have to swap to the other tank. I mean, most likely you'll have to. There's not gonna be a situation where you never have to swap. You just don't know when to swap, and it makes it a little bit less consistent. You know, trying to get those top logs will be a little bit more annoying. I know people will be pissed off about that, but I feel like it would make it more fun to be, hey, I need to pay attention to what he's doing, and then do something. Not exactly like Thancred when he's doing his, oh, is it red or is it yellow or is it blue? You know, more of like on the tanks, like, oh, I have to decide on what I'm going to do at this point. Because, I mean, he did have a little bit of that, right? But it wasn't like at the point of where you needed to swap early because of it. Like, oh, I ran out of cooldown, so we need to swap.
Like E10S.
I can bring up.
Sure.
Go ahead.
You go.
I was just gonna say E10S had that where.
Yeah.
Sorry. You had to. There was like a stacker tank buster part, but then again, that fight, it's also like if the tank is taking the cleaves or the first 4 hits of this buster, well, that's it. He's got a debuff. You can't really swap. There's no activity there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's react with more cooldowns, or you save that one for after. You know.
Yeah.
There is one example I can bring up. It's a little different because it doesn't pertain to tanks taking damage or damage in general, but it's along the same line of thinking, which is Titan that we've had this expansion. So both Titan Normal and Savage, his knockback mechanics that he does very frequently, he does them. So for the most part, I haven't really enjoyed knockback prevention in arm's length broadcast.
Yeah.
My cat is knocking things over. Sorry. Okay.
Okay.
So I haven't. I don't like that we have a button that we can press for literally everything that the boss throws at us regarding knockbacks, right? But Titan was very unique in that he threw them at us frequently enough that we had to pick and choose where we used our knockback prevention. We didn't always have it, and I think that's probably along the similar line of thinking as what Sausage was saying, which is just you don't know exactly when it's going to be. It's sort of frequent enough, right, that you need to pick and choose when you use things. It's a little more reactive. Granted, Titan is sort of like one of 2 possible rotations, which sort of changes things up. You could add in a third, maybe a 4th layer of randomness, kind of like Chaos, where you have 4 total rotations and they're in a somewhat random order. Even Chaos was a little bit like he was also just 2 rotations. They could have done it 4 completely randomly. Mm-hmm. But it's just that idea that just throw enough things at us. Like tank invulns, for example, pretty much just cheese most tank busters that we've had this expansion. If you give us enough busters, like Shiva only had 2 of them, and you could invuln both. Give us more of them, and we'll be forced to pick and choose. We can't just cheese everything. And that's when you have to start thinking about where you put your cooldowns. Because you can't just put them on auto attacks anymore in between, because you're not relying on your invuln anymore. You're sort of, okay, maybe I just use Rampart here and I save my stronger 30% and my smaller cooldown for the buster so I can survive.
So I'm of the opinion of completely removing invulns completely and removing knockback prevention. Because we have charge right now. So if you could charge after knockback and just be knocked back in the correct spot, or charge quick enough to where it doesn't matter, I feel like that's a lot more enjoyable than doing just a button to ignore it completely.
Yeah, I actually agree with the complete removal of knockback prevention, because I think it's making us do mechanics in a way that they weren't designed to be done. Like we're basically just removing mechanics instead of Like there might be a knockback and there's a safe spot on the other side of the arena, but there's also one on the boss. Well, it should just be that we have to get knocked back to the safe spot on the other side. Like, that's sort of how the mechanic was designed. That doesn't exist. That's just a random example. But it's that sort of idea that we're just doing away with mechanics when there was a design. Like, there was thought put into creating something to be done in a certain way, and then we just press a button and it's gone. And I don't agree with that.
How about Living Liquid? Remember? Digititis. You would get washed away in a random direction. If you could just arm's length that, the mechanic would not be difficult whatsoever.
Yeah. That was really enjoyable because you're just like, oh, how do I need to position myself with the other players and deal with this knockback?
I was a Dragoon, so if I could jump cancel that, it was so satisfying.
Yeah. But I mean, like, if we have invulnerabilities, or maybe everybody gets one invulnerability per fight, and that's it. You don't have a timer on it. You just get one chance to use it during the fight. And just make it to where tanks have to plan their cooldowns and make it to plan, react, whatever they do with it. They just have to be used to not just say, oh, well, this mechanic... Because Paladin is just stupid. All right, 10 seconds of just not taking damage at all and just completely negating any thought from the healers, I feel is kind of cheating the difficulty of the fight to make it at least enjoyable in a challenging way. So, I don't know.
When you combine it with cover tech, it's really interesting. Because it doesn't work with cover, right? But you can use it to stand in something to be able to cover somebody you couldn't reach. That's a use where I think it's really cool.
Would we use cover? Like, we have to force places where we can use cover and make it useful. We have to sit there and force it into the game, and it sucks.
Also, think about how more dangerous something like the ultimates would be if you couldn't invuln. Like, if you had to do Golden Bahamut's Akmorns without any invulns, if you had to do Perfect Alexander without any invulns, you would really have to spread things thin. It would become very difficult.
I mean, go ahead.
I was just gonna add, they've given us maybe one too many tools to just completely ignore the design that they're trying to show us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Imagine Wormhole if you couldn't use a knockback, and you had to actually think about it and position really properly. I mean, I agree with you, Frosty. I don't really care for arm's length and stuff. Although I really liked using tech where you tempered will and cover somebody to save somebody from getting knocked back. I thought that
you just like cover, man. You just liked it. No, yeah.
I do just like cover. Cover used to be awesome. I loved it.
It used to be really great in PvP, man. But we won't go into that. The I feel like it also removes that team interaction, and so. When you have one button that just cures all issues with damage right there, you don't have that planning of, oh, when do I use this cooldown? When can this healer use this thing to shield? Like, none of that stuff matters anymore. You don't have to coordinate as much when you have a cheat button. And so it would be a lot more fun, and I think it would add a lot more interaction within the rest of the team doing Savage, which I think should be required. Is that there is some sort of communication happening in a Savage fight where you have to coordinate with the other players. It shouldn't be you go in there, you do your thing, and it's done.
Now I'll play devil's advocate. Do you think that would make Party Finder less accessible for people who are just picking up tank?
It would be maybe. I don't know. I feel like it would change the dynamic because people might actually try to be nicer because they depend on other people. But they'll stay shitty and they'll make people not want to play.
Like blame others instead.
Yeah, blaming others.
I gave you Dragon Sight and you died immediately.
Yeah, and so I don't know for sure, but I feel like we're at this point and players are hopefully skilled enough to for us to start shaving a couple of these little things off and making things. I think we can start making the game more challenging. Like we've gone down low enough to where we can inch up and make things just a little bit more challenging every single fight, every single expansion.
Passively raise the bar.
Yeah, we can start raising that bar again. I think we're just at the very bottom right now. I mean, I guess it could get lower, but these things where we're taking stuff, I don't know, maybe the Invone taking it away could be like something that would upset a lot of people. I don't know, but maybe just change it to once per fight so you're not using it twice per fight and cheesing every mechanic. For example, when we're doing Shiva and like you have 3 invulnerabilities in E12S at the very beginning, that you're using between the two tanks.
Oh, where the busters come out, you're like, we need to tank swap. Nah.
True.
It's so stupid. I mean, and the invulnerabilities, even for a warrior in the second part, you don't need a second tank. You really just don't need a second tank in the second part of the fight.
Oh, for like, what is it? For Halo, you just home gang, and then it comes up again later, and you have home gang again?
Yeah.
You only need another person to take that double APOC one where it jumps to 2 different people.
Yeah. You just let someone die and res them, and you're probably fine. You know, it's
probably.
Yeah.
So Sauce, you've been taking people. You and BJ have been helping a lot of tanks too with like parse tours and stuff, and trying to help them optimize and get better. Right? Do you think taking away tools would? Do you think those players would be all right and still learn? Like, do you think they'd maybe shift their mindset from damage and more to like, how the hell do I stay alive?
I think so. I think it's because like we're giving tools that kind of I think it's kind of spoiling people learning tank right now, or just people learning the roles right now in general. Like you have a get out of jail card every like 4 minutes for warrior, 5 minutes. I was gonna mention it earlier too. Speaking of team interactions, isn't that Stormblood basically? Because like I said earlier, like you have aggro stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, working with other tanks.
I do think removing the debuffs was good, like slashing, piercing, and stuff. That forced very specific comps, so I'm okay with them getting rid of that.
Yeah, but if they brought that back, I think in terms of team interaction, that would really liven things up. Because then people would be forced to work together. Like, hey, you're grabbing aggro, you can probably shift that aggro to someone else, or just at least decrease it. You know. In terms of like, just to get back to your question, tanks learning the class without the get out of jail cards, I think it would just make it more lively. Yeah.
And I mean, for me, it's not even a get out of jail card. It's a delete mechanic card. It's like you plan to delete this mechanic for this fight. It's not like I'm in a bad situation, I use it. That's not how we use it. We just say, hey, I don't want this mechanic to exist in this fight, and that's it.
I don't want to deal with this because it's annoying, so now I won't.
Yeah.
And goodbye.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think tank invulns have a place, so I wouldn't get rid of it completely. My personal solution would be what I said before, which is just throw more things at us so we don't have the luxury of just deleting that one mechanic with an invuln, because it's going to come back again. And it's going to come back
like a one-time
in 1 minute or 2 minutes.
Instead of each of the tanks having a different duration, what if we have one invuln a fight?
I think that's a bit of a weird... It seems like a bit of a funky solution to me. Tanks still have a bit of identity in their tank invulns, mostly because of the reduced cooldown. So Warrior, for example, can deal with 2 busters in a single fight that most tanks can't. Or like in T, for example, Paladin, depending on your kill times, Paladins can't invuln the beginning of T because it won't be up for the beginning of Alex. So it sort of changes those sorts of dynamics a little bit. So I think it has a place. It's just we need more stuff that forces us to pick and choose a little bit more and forces us to manage the in-between a little bit more. Because it's only really a problem that you're deleting a mechanic because there are no other mechanics.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, if there was a point where like, oh, I'll use it here, and other tanks might want to use it here, and so on, and you can kind of move it around, and then you have to actually start using your cooldowns for other stuff, and make it a little bit more active damage mitigation, that would be great. So to where you're like putting it in your rotation constantly. You know, some of the most intense moments for me as a tank was the first buster as a paladin on E12S, where I'm like weaving in all of my GCTs, cooldowns, everything, all at that one point, so I can make sure I max damage mitigation while trying to put up damage, because I think at that point it times perfectly to where I have to like re-up whatever I'm doing in my rotation. It's been so long since I've done E12S.
You also got to provoke.
Yeah, and you also have to provoke. Then shirk, if just in case, you know, something weird's going on. Like, you just have to throw all those different things in. I I had to shirk every single time after it was done at the very end to get it back over to the guy because they would never provoke back. But it was interesting. I think actively throwing that into all your cooldowns, everything in your rotation, not just being, oh, I press a button and done. My damage rotation's done. Or not my damage, my mitigation's done. It would be nice if you had to press like, maybe that's it. Maybe there should be combo damage mitigation, where you have to press 1, then 2, then 3 to achieve maximum mitigation.
So you want like dark arts back.
Was that what dark arts did?
You could dark arts your dark mind.
Oh, okay.
Or like double the potency on. It's like something kind of like that, I guess.
Instead of just pressing the button and being done with it, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean, there were a couple interactions like that. Like Warrior can buff things into Shake It Off, and if Gunbreaker gets Brutal Shell up, then it can topple the shield onto Heart of Stone for somebody else. So I think that'd be cool.
Yeah.
And then you have to think about how you're going to defensively do things. And Warrior also used to have Storm's Path, and nobody used it.
So this is all like kind of leading into another topic about job difficulty overall for tanks. We all feel like the job difficulty is really not there, right? The minimum skill that you need, difficulty-wise, is not really there, right?
No. The skill ceiling exists in like speed runs and high-end optimization, but if you're just going into Party Finder and you're like, I want to clear this fight, I don't care what I do. I'm just going to 1, 2, 3. You're going to win. Yeah. You're going to win. You see, sometimes you'll even see people take busters and stuff, and they won't press a cooldown. And you know, last year was very prevalent for not Dark Knights would not TBN pre-pull because it wouldn't break, and it's part of your opener. You want to use it, but the damage just wasn't there. So you're like, I'll just take this remove buster. Great. Now heal me. And that was it. You're like, I will use raw intuition for everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really, the complexity isn't there. Nothing feels particularly lethal. And then if it is lethal, like take the buster you take in P12 or P1 of E12, you're using everything on it, because if you don't, you're dead. And E10S, you're throwing everything on it if you're not invulning, or you're dead. So they're very all or nothing.
Yeah, because there is no second follow-up that you need anything for, right? I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Especially because it forces tank swaps. It's like you're not tanking the boss anymore, so it doesn't matter if you have anything after that.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you could technically use, as a paladin, Sheltron on every single tank buster, and you're fine. Almost, right?
Yeah, in fact,
almost.
In Stormblood, it was 30%. Block strength was 30%. And I used to call it the free vengeance, because Paladin just had vengeance for every single tank buster, because 30% vengeance was 30%. It was so strong. It's different now because maximum block strength in the expansion is 20%, but it's also got a duration now. So you can press it and you'll just block everything for a time. Back in Stormblood, you had to be a little more careful because an auto attack could remove Sheltron immediately before the buster. So you had to time it very carefully in certain circumstances.
Ooh, too. When you had the sister cleaves, you prayed that the one you were blocking got Sheltron and not the one that the other tank was blocking. Otherwise, it ate the proc. And then you just died.
I don't know if this is true, but could it have been proximity to the boss? Like, if you're standing behind the other tank, would it consider them hit?
No, we had been both close to each other and far, and it was just like half and half. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't. But they've fixed that. But it really was a free vengeance back then. I think actively tanking more frequent busters, Sheltroning was awesome.
Yeah, it was really good. I think another interesting point to bring up is the change from Stormblood to Shadowbringers, which is tanks just got a flat 20%. So we didn't used to spend time in tank stance. So the 20% mitigation was there, but we didn't really use it. In removing tank stance the way it worked before, they gave us free 20% mitigation always on top of the higher tank defense. But then they also scaled up boss damage. So auto attacks and tank busters have been scaled up. So DPS can't tank it anymore. Like, they'll die in 3 autos. It's out of the question. But that also means a side effect of that is all damage that has been scaled around party HP does even less to tanks. So you don't really need to worry about mitigating raid wides as much. Like, it does happen. Like, beginning of Shiva or the beginning of E12, I forget its name. There is pretty high damage. There's a lot of auto attacks, and the raid wide damage is like Absolute Zero was scaled above the party HP, so it was a
Oh my
really
God, it was
hard hitting.
awful.
Yeah, it was a really hard hitting raid wide. So it was a not insignificant amount of damage to the tank, especially including the auto attacks they were taking. So those instances still exist a little bit, but for the most part, raid wides currently, as a tank, you don't really worry about it. Whereas in Stormblood, I specifically remember using Sheltron on raid wides to
Or getting a
basically to keep
personal
my
shield, right? So that you didn't die to the AoE.
yeah. So like either as the main tank you would want to mitigate the raid wide in amongst the auto attacks, or as a paladin you wanted to keep your HP higher for your spirits within, or as a did I say paladin or warrior? Both of them, upheaval
both of
and
them.
upheaval and spirits within. You wanted your health as high as possible for both of them. So yeah, it's just sort of a design change that happened that made tanks have to worry even less about damage just by default.
Yeah, I think right now, in terms of job difficulty, I think it's now kind of a choice if you want to make it complex and more optimal. You know, say for example, if you're into speed killing, I was in an E11S speed kill for this partition for a little bit, and for that fire stack in E11S, for example, like we purposefully had only 4 people stacked there, and in order to make it more complex for tanks, we were like, okay, if you come here, if you stack 4 people only, then we can use, say, a TBN or a Heart of Stone to cover this guy who's whoever's lowest in the list, right? And
You're
that'll keep
LP
them.
cheesing, right?
Yes, exactly. But like what Zeph said, I think this boils down to game design now. Like for people trying to do the most optimal in a fight, like you have to make that decision. If we're talking about like a party finder or whatever, that wouldn't be possible because like you said, you can kind of just press Sheltron and win something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think it might be on purpose that they're trying to make it slightly, well, obviously it's easier now, but if we hope for it to be even more complex, at least for the party finder level,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it'd be called Savage anymore.
No,
Or it wouldn't Savage level anymore. Yeah.
man. Back in
And
my
even
day,
if you wanted
Savage was
to-
like savage. It was, you know, back.
People quit the game.
Yeah. They
Well, that's
you
very,
couldn't beat Savage, and they were like, oh well, I'm done. A3S, my friend. What a
That
fight.
fight made people realize they sucked. I know
Yeah.
I did. But if you were to put, so I've been trying to mull this over for a bit now, where you said have people work together again.
Mhm.
We kind of have situations like that now, where you're like, I really need this feint, or I'm going to die, and then the DPS just go, can't do it.
Well,
Can't do it. It's not possible.
why
there.
do they have
So
to
then
think
you're like,
about
yes,
it?
I'll die.
Yeah. They don't think
But
about it.
if they took that route to make DPS care about it more,
Mhm.
I just think tanks would die more. I don't
You
think
think
they'd
so?
do it. A lot of players would not get used to it. Yeah, there's a lot of players who will straight up be ignorant and unwilling to help, and they'll just say, can't do it.
So
I'm
here's-
bursting there.
Yeah, melee, they don't need to have that. Melee doesn't need to have that ability. I think ranged physical should have more support abilities.
Like Palisade, they used to have it, and they have the freedom. Melees are already working hard for their positionals. I agree completely. Make physical range do everything from now on, forever.
Yeah, all support. Give all support stuff to them and make it a support role again. And I think that would be...
When I played ranged, I wish I had Palisade because it was so strong.
It was the reason we didn't run a caster. We ran double range because they had refresh for the healers and the paladin, and we had double Palisade. So good.
Yeah. So I did want to bring this in because we're talking a little bit about the difficulty level of everything. I mean, part of what people will say the difficulty is for tanks is the anxiety of, you know, if you mess up, it messes everything up. I don't know, and maybe this is just because I stopped caring a long time. I mean, I kind of do still. Like, if I'm a party finder, I'm like, oh, I don't want them to fucking think I'm horrible. But I kind of get over it pretty quick. Do we feel like maybe tanks overall were made a little bit easier to subdue some of that tank anxiety or issues that people have to deal with.
100%. I feel like if you make a mistake, you are immediately in the spotlight. Like I think tanks and healers, right? If a healer misses something, instantly, if somebody dies, healer was greeting. Maybe they were just pressing a button that cast a little slower than another one, and they got people killed, or maybe they used something a little less potent. But like a tank, you go the wrong way, you don't press this cooldown, you don't do this swap, you don't provoke on time. Immediate repercussions. And I feel like a lot of people that come to me and they're like, how do you get over your tank anxiety? And I feel really bad for saying this, but I never really had any. I tried out tanking. You know, I got contacted one day by somebody else, a Dragoon man. They're like, hey, do you want to try out for my static as a tank? And I'm like, I've never really done it, but sure. And then they're like, great, you're main tanking everything, including the parts where we tank swap. I'll just cover you for 10 seconds. So then I was like, okay. And, you know, I messed up and people were patient. And then I learned how to spread everything thin, and I did my homework, and I've just always loved tanking and jump at it. And I try to tell people that if they're facing tank anxiety, if they're feeling like really anxious about things, to just jump in. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn. Everybody else is. And I guarantee you there's a DPS out there who's messing something up and you don't know it because you can't see the rotation.
Yep.
Somebody's making a mistake and you have no idea. Some red mage over there is at like 95 black mana and like 5 white mana, and you just don't know it.
Yeah. So Sausage, did you ever have tank anxiety?
Funny enough, same with Drin. I never really, because even in my previous MMOs, I'd always start with a tank. I love the idea of being tankier and not dying in the first hit, you know?
You want to cheat them? Just say, I'm gonna live.
Like, oh shit, I'm still alive. Yeah. So I never really had it. But I do understand why people have tank anxiety. It's kind of like being on stage and you're the first one in front, and you know you slip up a little bit and everyone sees it, but no one sees the guy who's like taking a crap on the floor at the back. You know?
Yeah.
Like no one sees it, but they're all messing up. We're all messing up. But like at the end of the day, tank is one of the roles that you have to that needs to be filled. It's just another video game mechanic that you gotta do, you know?
Yeah.
You're just in front. That's all.
Zeph, did you ever feel any tank anxiety, or are we just all super confident people?
I feel like I feel bad because I feel like we need someone here that did, but no, I didn't either. But maybe that came down to the fact that I had been playing a long time, and I had a pretty good understanding of the game overall before I even stepped in to try tanking for the first time. And it may have also been the environment. I mean, I tanked, I actually tanked in Heavensward, sort of just for tank queues, basically. And on Japanese Data Center, tank queues include Savage. So I used to just go into, like in Creator, for example, I just do 9, 10, and 11 on Paladin for the faster queues. I wasn't actually confident with 12 on Paladin, understandably, knowing Paladin and how particular it was in that fight. And so I just do that one on Summoner because I was more comfortable on that. And then in Stormblood, I started a static with a friend, and we just said, you know what, we'll just play whatever, like we'll just recruit and we'll just fill the last 2 remaining roles. And so it just so happened that I ended up on tank. That's how I actually started tanking as a main, and I ended up just loving it. And so it was a pretty comfortable and fair environment to start on tank, I guess, and to sort of grow up in the role, I guess. So, I mean, maybe that could be an example for one way to find yourself in tanking.
Okay.
Granted,
something like an extreme.
A static
you know?
won't always work.
Yeah.
Do like a trial. Do your expert dungeons.
Yeah. So I will say
that's what I tell people.
I will say
I just say.
Go ahead, Zeph, you fucking rude piece of shit. Just go ahead, Zeph. Go ahead.
That's what I tell people. I say going to extremes, going to 24-mans where there's like 24-mans especially. There is so much chaos going on that people aren't really like. There's a lot of people. No one's really paying attention to just one tank in amongst 24 other people. So I think that's a perfect environment to just sort of get comfortable with your rotation, get comfortable with a bit of mitigation and sort of party mitigation and all that sort of thing. 24-mans, and then maybe upgrade to extremes where it is just 8 people and you have a little bit more responsibility, but it's still forgiving enough that even if half the party mess up and die, it's still winnable as long as the healers are alive. and not giving up.
Yeah. Never give up, never surrender. Here's the thing. Like I've had issues with tanking where I've had days where I'm just like, oh, I didn't fuck up. It was, I don't want to fuck up and all this other stuff. But I feel like that transfers over to if I play DPS, if I play healer. It doesn't matter what I do. There is always that initial stress of, hey, I don't want to mess up because I don't want to mess up. It's not as much of me messing up and caring what other people think. It's just that I want to do a good job. And I know that people with a keen eye will see it. So, no matter what, that's just part of it. And I think it does make sense that Square Enix would think at the tank job and say, hey, look, we want to minimize this because we want people to be more emotionally sound when they're playing, I guess. But I feel like it's just something you get. And when you become a tank and you play tank, you learn to not have stage fright. I mean, it kind of like, I guess it's one of those things, like if you go on stage, a lot of people who just go on stage, sometimes they go in there, they don't fucking care. Like, if I go on stage, I got butterflies in my stomach, I'm like fucking like nervous as shit, right? But eventually that just goes away. And kind of learning just to manage to deal with that. Go ahead.
I believe this is my third time on MogTalk.
Yeah?
I was pretty nervous the first time. Third time in, I'm comfortable as can be now. So, like, it's just like that. Like, the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it.
Yeah. I feel like that's really it. You learn that it's just you're doing your set of mechanics, and you may mess it up. If people talk shit and they're shitty to you, it's because they're shitty people. It doesn't really matter. I mean, that's how I've gone about life, is if someone's shitty to me, I don't really care because I don't want to know the guy. I'm done. I've had to grow from that a little bit. Because I definitely used to be a lot more, I want everybody to like me all the time. I don't want anyone not to like me. I'd be so upset if they didn't like me. But I don't know. I do. Obviously, this show is like a shitty show, and so I've stopped caring at some point.
Everybody loves you. You know it.
Say sweet things.
Yeah, I'm nervous right now.
Oh,
That's okay.
Sausage? Yeah, you should be, man. You fucked up like half this show, dude. I don't know what you're... No.
So I was reading some of the comments. There are people in chat who said they have anxiety too, and I feel like from less of a philosophical standpoint, more of an objective standpoint, people are gonna. If you are somebody who is naturally anxious, you're probably gonna stay anxious going into tanking because the game doesn't exactly do the greatest of jobs of preparing you to do that. It kind of goes all or nothing, right? Like we were talking about before, and even more now where things have homogenized, where it's like, I survived a tank buster. Was the healer supposed to give me a shield, or was I supposed to pop a cooldown? I don't know. I lived with like 5 HP. They need to heal me. And then you're in dungeons, and for the most part, when you're in dungeons, it's a big question mark, right? You might get to like the X5 level, like Bardam's Medal, and you'll get to that dungeon, and you'll be like, wow, I'm taking a lot of damage because this healer sucks. And the healer will be like, this tank's taking a lot of damage because they suck. And the DPS will go, why are they wearing level 30 gear? You know, and
DPS is all knowing, man.
The game doesn't tell you. It's like, hey,
yeah,
this is what's happening to you. And we also are missing damage properties. Like I took Bardam's Medal as a specific example too, because when you do the opening fight, you're fighting a bunch of these little like jumpy little grass Halgai guys, and they're all using arrow on you. And if you're keen and you're looking at that, you see the damage, you're like, arrow, that's magic. I'm gonna pop my Dark Mind or my Heart of Light, and now I'm gonna take less damage because it's magic damage. So now I'm more tanky. But the game doesn't innately tell you, hey, look at this, pay attention to this, do this. The game's kind of like, we're hiding everything from you.
I think another thing that's missing is a death report, which a lot of other MMOs have, where you just, if you die, you press a button and it gives you a list of every instance of damage you took and whether you had mitigation for it or not. And so you can look back and go, oh, I thought I pressed my rampart on time or my invuln, but it didn't actually apply to this. So now I know that, first of all, I didn't have it up when I thought I did, and second of all, maybe it just had more of a delay than I thought, and I need to use it earlier.
Yeah. Homing laser and Uwu, very early snapshot, and people will think they used everything. Like, this hits for too much damage, I can't live. No, they're just not telling you. And I think as far as I'm aware, the only certainties are either that you parried it or blocked it.
Well, I'll tell you I do think this game is very much at trying to avoid blame in any way possible, shape, or form. And I do think that does do some damage to the mentality of a lot of people in the community overall. Like, again, one of the reasons we don't want to see damage is because we don't want there to be blame out there. We don't want people to say, oh, you suck or you're not great or something else. So a death report would be great, but I feel like they might be afraid that it's like making the player feel like they're being blamed for something. Although I feel like any of that stuff, as long as it stays local to that player and they see only their stuff, should be okay. Just like
it exists in the battle log.
Yeah, I mean
it's in the battle log. It's
but no one
hard to find.
Yeah, no one reads the battle log unless if you are evil, and so I think that a damage meter actually would do well in this game if it only showed your damage to you. You could always only see your damage. You wouldn't see other people. Of course, you could use other ways to find that stuff out, whatever. But if it was innate in the game, it would be more positive for players overall if they could just see their own damage and maybe not see anyone else's damage, but see their own damage so they can find, oh, well, how can I improve this and make this number higher? And you don't have to stress about it.
I'm just going to start a GoFundMe for an abacus.
Abacus,
yeah.
Yeah, you're doing this the entire time you're playing.
The whole time.
Yeah, just reading every number as it flies across. Yeah. So I think that could be good.
I do think at least mitigation, like Zeph touched on, like if it told you, like, Frosty, you die to a mechanic, it's like, was Sentinel up? You're like, well, it's on cooldown. It must have been up. And the game tells you, well, no, it wasn't up yet. And you go, oh, so snapshotting exists.
That could be another reason why it doesn't exist in the game, because you're like, I pressed the button. When I pressed it before the thing hit me. It should have worked. And then you're like, oh, shitty game. You're not like, oh.
That causes so many arguments, because when you don't know that it's the game not activating it for you because you didn't press it early enough, suddenly it becomes, you should have kept me healthy. You didn't pop your cooldown. I used it. It's on cooldown. Well, clearly you didn't because you died. Well, I'm doing the same thing every time. I'm doing the same thing every time. And then you fight and you argue and then I don't want to heal anymore. I want to go DPS next tier. And it causes a lot of problems. And like, maybe not party finder wise, because people will just silently leave because you're not allowed to type anything anymore. But like statics, I've so many arguments in my own too, where people are just mistaken, but you think it went off because to the best of your knowledge from what you saw, it should have worked. And then you look back and you're like, oh, it didn't? Well, that sucks. Now we just had a big argument for no reason.
But does the game want to highlight that?
It should. It should. The game should take responsibility for something neutral rather than
the game should be like, my bad.
Between the players.
Like there should be
not saying the game made the mistake, but telling you that you made the mistake by not doing it with how the game is designed.
Yeah.
We already know snapshotting and server request and ticks and everything. All of that plays a part, right? Nothing is instant. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't tell you this at any point.
Maybe it should just apply the buff images and the graphical interaction with those abilities to be later. And so that delay, you may have hit it early, great. But once you see the graphic come up, 100% it's applied. 100% it's working.
Not like Hollow Ground, where it's up and you're still dead.
Yeah, that's the worst feeling. It feels so, man, back when cooldowns didn't reset, when you die.
Yeah. You use it, you die, you wipe.
Yeah,
you have to wait.
It. And you're like, you die, and you're like, well, now I got to wait 7 minutes before we do this next, what fight was it? Was it A6? A6, I did a lot of waiting with that gauntlet boss.
You did it a lot in A4 as well, right? No, not A4. I'm sorry, A8. You would start at the beginning of A8. Tank would miss Living Dead, and then guess we're waiting for like 5 minutes.
Yeah. So, Sausage, you're talking about. We've almost been doing this for 2 hours, by the way. It doesn't feel like it's been 2 hours, but it's almost been 2 hours. But Sausage, I do want to talk to you a little bit because you said that you played other MMOs and your tanking was kind of your go-to, right?
I didn't really play the more popular games like Ion, thing like that. Yeah, because
tell me what you played. Tell me the unpopular games you played.
Oh no, just older
Hello
games.
Kitty Island. Penguin Club.
Sure, why not?
He said unpopular.
Oh, you're right.
Penguin.
Right.
Hentai Battle Plus. You know.
Oh, you played that too?
Oh yeah. I was a great tentacle monster in that game, dude. Okay.
No, I played a lot of the free to play games, and there are a lot of those.
Yes, there are.
Free to play.
Well, I played some too, so
I did
go
too.
ahead.
Yeah. You guys
It's okay.
know-
You don't have to show us your underwear and all that great
It's
stuff.
Sausage. Frosty and I played the shittiest MMO that's ever existed.
I can't
okay?
believe
We've
you
been
took
there.
Tibia is just such a fucking bad MMO.
Tibia.
I will
But we
say-
did it.
I will say one of my best feelings, like I was at a point to where, and this is complete tangent. Everybody watching, this doesn't do anything with tanks. I was playing Tibia, and I got to this point to where it's like I was going to kill all the people who kill other people. I was going to be the vengeance person, right? And like I don't know if you remember, was it Sorcerer or whatever it's called? It would have like this death
I was a master
rune.
sorcerer, yeah.
Yeah, death rune
And you
or
use
whatever.
sudden death, SD runes.
And so yeah, I would carry a bag of that around. I'd go find this guy who was a player killer, and I'd sit next to him. I'd get him to start typing to me, then SD like twice, and just drag his body down the street.
Oh yeah.
And like
We used to do heal bombs, so we would have like because it's cell based, right?
yeah.
We would lure them to a spot where we were fighting, and then everybody would log in at once and just SD as they logged in.
It just all cast this like really high damage and ability on this one guy and just kill him immediately. Then you always have to drag his body away to a safe spot so you could loot him and other people wouldn't. So you
For those of you who don't know, when you die, you logged out. You got logged out, and everything you were carrying was dropped in your backpack on your corpse, which anybody could loot.
yeah.
God.
Yeah.
You also lost 10% of the experience you had gained since level 1.
Yeah.
So you could lose like a whole month of work.
Yeah, not
Oh my
10% of your level, 10% of your overall you ever gained experience. And so people, I have to imagine people walking by, people seeing a dead body being dragged by somebody, and you're like, well, I'm fucking not touching it. You just like run it off.
You either like you get that froggy moment where you're like, I could hijack this, and you're like, but how did that corpse get there?
Yeah. There's so much goofy shit. Anyways, that I was just thinking about that the other day, and I was like, man, those were fucking, those were the wild, wild west days, dude. It was.
All right,
was
Sauce,
great.
we told you our shitty MMO. What's one you
Yeah.
played? That was a free-to-play one, by the way.
It was. You could pay a premium and buy a house, which was really cool. But anyways, go ahead, Sausage.
I used to play a bunch of the Area Games MMORPGs. I'm not sure if you guys know that company.
I do know the company.
Yes.
I think I played a couple as well, but my internet was terrible, so I played only the ones that were like less than a gigabyte.
Yeah. I was still in my home country back then too, so my internet was terrible as well. And yeah, I was still a kid back then too. So I used to play a lot of those games, kind of like AK Aura Kingdom, Eden Eternal. You guys know those?
I don't know them at all.
Okay, perfect. So
Yeah.
they weren't that great. But every one of those games, I'd always choose the tank class. It will always have like an axe or sword and shield, sword and board type stuff, you know?
Tibia is, by the way, is Ren's background right now. That's Tibia. Just so you know.
This shitty game.
I'm starting to think you actually like this game.
It was a big moment of my life, dude. I was 12 years old, and I was just like, it's so many
Me
big
too.
emotional events. Yeah. So
It
many
was where
big
I met my
emotional
first friends.
Yeah,
Oh,
me too.
man.
Maybe we knew each other, and we just didn't know we knew each other or something.
Maybe I killed you. I was a master sorcerer, so I SD'd people.
Maybe. But I killed, man, and fuck. Different day, Ren. Different day. We'll talk
Different
about this.
day entirely.
But the main reason I was bringing that up, Sausage, is I wanted to ask you, since you go and you play tanks in other games, if you were able to compare tanks in other MMOs versus, Final Fantasy XIV, and if you think that maybe there's other things from other games that Final Fantasy XIV could adopt to make it better. But it sounds like you just played really shitty MMOs that would have no comparison.
I was gonna say, like the tanks in those games, they had maybe like a reflect button or a mitigate button, but that's just 2 buttons. The moment I started playing like Final Fantasy XIV, I was like, "Yep, this is the one. I'm staying here. This is in Stormblood." That was it.
Okay.
Well, like for as not complex as we say it is anymore, I think it's still more complex than like most other games.
Definitely, 100%.
Okay.
And I still have hope. I still have hope that they'll amp it up a little bit for the next expansion.
Zeph, what about you? Do you have any comparisons you could make from other MMOs?
I did actually try tanking in Sword of Legends Online when they had their beta just recently. And obviously, every MMO I try these days, I always make comparisons back to Final Fantasy. And an interesting one in that was so it's action-based combat. It's it's kind of cooldown based. Like you do have your cooldowns, and then you have sort of your main ability that's just being spammed. There's no G City. You just press things whenever you have it. There are animation locks that sort of that sort of thing you optimize around. But the interesting thing with tanking in that is when you can always be doing something, it feels really bad when you have to move the boss and you have to just run.
Yes.
Like it's like Gunbreaker but worse, because sometimes the boss just has to be somewhere for a mechanic, and you have nothing you can do. So you just run and you just stand there and you wait. So one of the things I actually like about Final Fantasy is the fact that you can still move the boss and still maintain 100% efficiency in amongst all of that. So it's sort of like perfection in a sense is possible, because it doesn't matter what you're doing for 2.5 seconds, as long as every 2.5 seconds you are on the boss pressing your G City. To sort of simplify the example a little bit. So as much fun as I had in solo, there's just something about Final Fantasy that feels right to me. Just with the pacing and the flow of the combat, I just keep coming back to it.
It's very cohesive. Like,
Yeah.
I think the big example I thought of when you said that was Nightmare, when you had the boss and he would jump to a wall and then send out his clones, but he could literally jump from one side of the arena to the other, and you just had to walk to get to him.
Although I had a low cooldown ability that allowed me to latch onto him and then follow him all the way over, which felt really good.
But the other side of that is all those jobs in that game, because I could draw a comparison because I was playing it too as a DPS. A lot of the abilities have very small range, so if you move the boss even a little bit, I could miss. And then there goes my resource builder dump that I just built up, and I just used it and it's gone.
Okay.
So Final Fantasy definitely does a really good job in terms of just mechanics and how you position and the pace of combat. And the fights aren't too long either, right? I mean, we don't spend too long fighting anything.
Yeah.
No, unless you're just wiping over and over again.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. But I think that. So you're saying in general, Final Fantasy XIV is still kind of top of the game with how tanks play in general.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, for me, there's a reason I keep choosing this MMO as my
Yeah.
favorite. That's my primary reason, and the reason I will continue to tank.
I mean, I tanked in WoW for Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, Mist of Pandaria, and I did a little bit of WoD, whatever that was. What was that?
Warlords of Draenor?
Yeah, Warlords of Draenor. And so I can't even really remember, to be honest with you, how to tank in WoW anymore. I don't know
You
how
had a
it
lot
is.
of interrupts, and it was very, very spammy. So you had a lot of resource build and then a lot of resource dump with active mitigation that you were constantly throwing up from your resource.
Yeah.
It was very frequent damage. I did tanking through Kata as well, and then a little in BFA, and it's still sort of the same there, but it's not. I would say not as engaging as it is in Final Fantasy.
Okay.
Because you kind of feel like you're just mashing buttons and doing things that most other people are also doing, right? Which is kind of what Final Fantasy is getting into.
I
Hopefully
would
it
say
doesn't
when it comes
dive.
to dungeons,
Yeah.
when it comes to dungeons at least, tanking in WoW has significantly more responsibility than in Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
Especially
But
when
that's sort of
you
just
have to think of the
dungeons in a
pacing and
nutshell.
the positioning around the affixes, right? So you're like, oh, well, we're going to get this affix where everything dies and drops a poison puddle now. Got to run around and do this. So things are going to explode, so we got to spread them out. But in Final Fantasy, that doesn't really exist.
Despise the way tanking is for Final Fantasy Dungeons. I hate it. I hate the fact that
Pull
it's
12 mobs, kill a boss.
Yeah, pull until you can't pull anymore, and just do AoEs and kind of do your cooldowns throughout it, and just hope they die fast enough. And that's how you do all dungeons. And it's not even something that you just do if you're like with a really good group. You do it with random people. It's just what you do. You just pull everything. There are people who don't pull all the way to the boss room, or all the way to wherever that wall is. But that's not seen as a good thing. That's seen as bad. You have to pull.
Depending
all
on the
way to
group, yeah. Either people prefer you to pull everything or they want you to pull nothing.
Yeah. I mean, as to me, it's so rare that people want you to pull nothing unless if it's just a newer healer, and that's it.
Yeah.
A healer that
Like
doesn't
you
do
go
a
and
lot
you
of
see a bunch
raiding.
of sprouts viewing
Yeah.
cutscene. If I see a sprout and it says they're viewing the cutscene, I'm like, all right, they're probably not ready for that,
No.
right?
I
But
thi-
I learned something
Mhm.
today. I'm
Sure.
leveling on another data center, and I learned something today about tanking in a dungeon. Did you know it is impossible to outrange an auto attack from an enemy, no matter how far away you go? You can't outrange them. It's useless in this game.
No, I did not know that.
I didn't either.
Yeah. Okay, so you tried hiding and running away and it didn't work?
My tongue is in my cheek. You can outrange autos if you know the pace
I'm
at
sure
which
that
they're
was your
coming at
tongue.
you.
Yeah, no, that's good.
But I was told by two very lovely people, because I had a sprout on my head on that server.
Yeah.
And they were like, by the way, kiting is useless here. You can't outrange an auto. You're running around for no reason. I'm like, well, I just took like half the damage I would have taken if I stood still. So
Yeah.
Yeah, when I
me.
do big pulls, I run a circle around the mobs because they sort of body block each other.
Yes, and then
So
half
when
of them
you
don't get to.
yeah, so if you're out of cooldowns, like if they're not dead yet, they should be dead by the time I'm out of cooldowns. But if they're not, that's when I start running.
And that's exactly
at
what I
that
was
point,
doing.
it
It's
can
in
be-
Holminster
yeah.
Switch, and I'm sure you know the pacing of that dungeon is a little awkward because you're forced into segmented pulls, so you don't have cooldowns up for everything. So I was running around in a circle. I'm like, well, I'm just gonna outrange these for 10 seconds. But yeah, so little things like that are things also people are not taught in this game. You're not taught that you could do that. You're not taught that arm's length is a cooldown, right?
Yeah. That was a big PSA at the beginning of Shadowbringers that was put out there. But I think that if they did go back, I want it to be where if you pull two groups, most likely you're going to die. I think that would be more enjoyable to me for a tanking, that you'd pull one group. If you pull two groups, you have to do some mad crazy shit and work together as like a team to stun, to do all this stuff, and just make sure that things don't kill you. That would be great. Right now it's just pull and cooldowns. Yeah.
Have you guys ever tried tanking the first pull of Mount Gulg?
Yeah, that's one of the dungeons where I was kiting around in a circle.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember,
but
Pulls like that also, if you go into Shisui of the Violet Tides after the first boss, you can pull everything right up until the next boss. That's a really big pull as well. And that one's difficult. Just like one of the other dungeons later on. I won't say the name because it's spoilery, but sometimes you have to kite in a certain way to get ads to pile up because ranged ads are going to stop the moment they can hit you. So then they're not going to group up. And you gotta work around a corner or something to get them in. And that's really nice. Don't ever just be like, they're ahead of me and they stop, so just deal with it. Yeah. I would say as a tank, challenge yourself to find these solutions.
So
because more often than not, they're there.
There is some chatter in chat that people would say that like they wouldn't want to have to spend longer in a dungeon than they have to. And I think that's a true sign of something that's just overall bad design. Because when you shouldn't have, of course you have that carrot on the stick, right? Oh, you do it because it's your daily, you just want to get in and out and all that great stuff. But that shouldn't be the only thing you're getting out of it. It should have fun.
It should be fun.
Yeah, fun, enjoyable.
Right. I don't
in
want
some
to run
other
a dungeon
manner.
just because I have to, right? Because I'll tell you something right now. I'm going to tell you something right now. And I know Sauce and Zeph, you two might be similar, you might not. But when I'm capping my tombstones every week, I'm not doing it running my experts. If I don't like the dungeon, I'm not running it. I will be helping people clear fights for the week or optimizing and doing multiple kills of a fight because it will give me the tombstones I need. I'll do something I want to be doing for the currency.
When I'm doing a lot of savage clears, usually I just cap before I even realize because I'm having fun just repeating the fight and optimizing or challenging myself or helping others. The tomes, like even though it's only 30 per fight, and realistically it could take you a whole day of raiding before you cap. That's a whole day that you weren't thinking about capping. You were doing something else and you just happened to cap because it was fun.
I mean, and truthfully, that's how I used to cap with PvP. Is that I would never have to do experts because I did so many matches.
Yeah, that too.
Like,
when I was going into ranked last season, I was surprised. I was like, all right, I wrapped up for the night and I looked and I was done. I was like,
no.
What do you mean I can't obtain any more tombstones of these other ones? I got to go spend. And it's great. It's great when you're doing something you want to do.
Look at there's so much content that gives you tomes. Just find the content you like doing and do that. and you'll be more happy than just gain on do expert. Okay, I did the trash I want to do every time.
Run a hunt train. In the same time you could run a dungeon, you will complete a hunt train and get more.
Yeah.
So I guess while chat's talking about not wanting to spend longer in a dungeon, what is chat's idea on how long you think a dungeon should take? Because I know sometimes a dungeon will take me a half hour, sometimes it'll take me 10 minutes, and it's the same dungeon.
Yeah.
I feel like any player party should probably clear it faster than a trust, right?
Of course. I think that's true. That's true for most parts. Unless if you don't pull like to the wall and you slowly pull one by one and just one DPS is AFK, then you might be slower than the trust. But it's highly unlikely. For me, a dungeon 20 to 30 minutes, to be honest, is kind of what I would in my head think. With a little bit of trouble, you'd be more on the 30-minute side. With less trouble, you'd be on the 20-minute side. Right now, it's 10 to 20, I think, right?
I don't think I've taken longer than 15 in like over a year.
Yeah.
Anywhere on any data center I'm playing.
It's pretty
like they are
quick.
Fast.
Yeah.
The dungeons are actually a little bit closer to 15 minutes now than either. I feel like probably the past year of dungeons have been closer to 15. Prior to that, and especially in Stormblood, you could get closer to 10. And the problem I have with the latest dungeons is a lot of that time is coming from just running between mobs,
or little
they've
cutscene like
segmented things so much more.
The forced little cutscenes that you get, right?
Yeah, it's sort of the side effect of that is because they want to keep dungeon times down. If there is a lot of running, and we saw this in Matoya's Relict, if they have a lot of running, they're actually scaling the mobs down so that you don't spend as long on them, just to keep the overall dungeon time down. And that resulted in a very underwhelming dungeon where the mobs just died instantly. You'd barely even get started on your burst rotation and they're already gone. As a tank, you're not taking any damage. As a healer, the tank isn't taking any damage. It just feels like nothing you do even matters, and it's very unfulfilling.
Yeah, the boss, the water sprout boss thing, I didn't even it was dead before I even realized it was doing anything.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. All right, so I guess we've talked a good bit about all this stuff, and I am, by the way, guys, I am working to try to get these shows into readable digest. That's what I'm going to do. Is I'm actually going to hire somebody to write a digest for these shows, and hopefully we're seeing how that will work out. So I'm doing my best not to keep these shows 4 hours long, so it's actually manageable for someone who's writing a digest for them. But that being said, I do want to go over some of the other things that we haven't hit nearly all the topics that we wrote up. There's still plenty that we can talk about. But I do want to ask everybody here kind of other things that you think we should talk about before we close up the show. And I do want to start, you know what? Let's start with new guy, Sausage. What's something that we didn't mention yet that you definitely want to dive into?
Damage responsibility.
Damage responsibility. So, as tanks having to be responsible for doing damage in fights, and that being one of the big sole focuses of the role. You mean?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, of course, first off, you need to understand, or tank players need to understand the responsibilities of their role, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which typically in the party finder, it's do the tank stuff, do all the tank mechanics, and you're good, right?
Yeah.
But I think, and to some degree, I guess it also depends on the kind of party you're playing with. You guys have to have a specific goal. If it's just for a clear, I guess you can't really tell people you need to do this or you need to know this much of your job, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's important to at least know the gist of how your job works. Because there are some tanks that I've bumped into who just don't care, right? Like I think someone mentioned it. I think it was Zheph, I think it was Zheph, where it becomes a problem when, say, for some reason your co-tank, for example, is just at the bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Completely at the bottom. Why is it 3K here for you? What are you doing, right? And to that I say, how I see doing endgame content, whether it's Savage or Ultimate, it's leveling all the way from 1 to 80, or if you skipped, right, 60 to 80 or 7 to 80. I think it's got similarities, and like I was just gonna compare it, kind of like graduating college and like working a job of your career field. Like you're expected to know a specific specific amount of knowledge to your class. And I think it's important that people at least this is my mental map for people who are trying to learn it as well. Like the first step is to like learn or know your basic rotation. You don't even have to optimize downtime into your rotation like how paladins have to do in the E11S, right? Because I think Zeph made like a spreadsheet for paladin. Like you have to do like a royal authority first and stuff like that. You don't even have to know any of that stuff. At least know your basic rotation, right?
So I guess this is a good point to go into just with how Square Enix Designs has been leading the tank role overall, because they do significant damage. Tanks do significant damage in a fight, and they can that variance can be pretty big from someone who's trying and someone who's not trying, and it could make a big difference to the whole party. So should that be a way that tanks are designed right now, or should their overall possible damage ceiling be much lower so when they mess up, it's less of an effect? No, it definitely should be. Okay, I see Ren's face.
Yeah.
I'm
Keep the complexity. The reason for this, let me tell you something right now. If you're a casual player and you're trying to just clear the tier, okay, be thankful that you have players like us who want to do well, because we keep Party Finder alive. You have players in there who know how to do their job. And if let's say Zeph and I were tanking together and we're only able to do 20% of the damage of a DPS, that means combined we're able to do 40% of the damage that a DPS can do. If we're playing our hearts out and we're doing the best we can and everybody else is just falling on the floor, we are making no impact. So being able to make a sizable difference, I think is really important. I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
And also I want to do all tank content. So
yeah. Yeah, and like I said earlier, it is endgame. You know, we can't. I don't think it's valid to pull the "I'll do whatever I want because I pay my sub" type deal. Like this is supposed to be hard content, and you should know a certain amount.
Not only that, but it's an MMO
towards the other members, right?
MMO,
like you're not playing by yourself.
Exactly, it's a team-based game. Like you should.
Like isn't that the whole appeal of MMOs, that you get to play with so many other people and you get to work with them and challenge these sorts of things? Like, why are you just being so insular?
Angela Simonis will tell you there's an entirely different reason to play this game.
No. The reason is so you could look good in front of other people. You need to look good in front of other people. That's literally the only reason to play.
Look at my gold medal.
Yeah.
Well, the cool thing about Angelus is that he is doing this solo stuff in an MMO. Like, there's a draw to that, but it's content that is...
I was just devil's advocate. Yes,
I know you're devil's advocate, but...
Yes.
Yeah, but it's content that is designed to be played with other people. Unlike, well, Palace of the Dead also other people, but you can do it solo. So that point aside.
Yeah. So
I agree with you completely.
But there are two sides of this whole learning your basic rotation, right? So after learning that rotation and understanding what you do as a tank, so your tank mechanics, like it is end game. So like optimization is going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to think about how to do something better eventually. So that includes, well,
you give a lot of credit on AP.
Yeah, well, supposedly, yeah, supposedly, I guess. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. But that includes like understanding what buffs are or what other people are trying to do. Like they put their buffs at this time. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that one.
Wow.
Or like changing your rotation to fit some like a bigger cooldown later, or, you know, or just getting max usage or like the quality of that usage, like what Ren said earlier.
Yeah.
Like these type of things, these should be being thought of in endgame.
Yeah, and if they're not, don't be too proud to accept that information from somebody else. I look at Sauce's logs. If he did something better than me, I'm gonna borrow it, and then he's gonna borrow from me because we're working together.
Exactly.
Don't be the first to do everything. Work together.
Exactly. That's what I'm doing with T right now. Actually, I'm looking at Ren's logs.
I guess with Final Fantasy XIV, that's something they did right with the damage, at least, is making it to where that's a part of your skill that you have to improve upon, and you're important to the fight with how you're doing your damage. And so thinking about that, it makes tanks more enjoyable because it's that one extra thing you can do to be valuable to your group. So
one thing to say about that, though, is Savage and Ultimate are pretty much the only places in the game where Enrage even exists. And so prior to that, the game doesn't actually punish you for poor DPS performance. Or any kind of performance, really, for the most part. Like, if I wanted to, I could go into a 24-man, die on the first mechanic, stay on the floor, and still clear the whole place.
Yep.
Because, it's every other bit of content in the game has been balanced such that it doesn't really matter what you do. And so, I think it might be a design issue in that Savage and Ultimate, or Savage particularly, because Savage is sort of the step up between everything else and Ultimate. But there is no step up between everything else and Savage itself. Extremes are there, but even extremes are extremely forgiving.
Sometimes Extreme is on a level of Savage in its own way. Like it's not.
Sometimes.
It's it could be like because the first. It depends on how the first and second fight work. Because sometimes the first fight is something that literally takes no thought for Savage. So I think that Extremes do kind of hit that same level where Savage is at. It's maybe a little bit lower sometimes, maybe a little bit. It depends.
I mean, as
The difference
controversial
in
as this will
Savage-
sound, I feel like normal mode should probably have an Enrage, even if it's like an Odin Enrage or Ruby Weapon where it gets to a certain percent and then begins a cast. Like this is the end of the fight now.
Mm-hmm.
Just to let
Because
people
it's
know
sort
that
of a
it's going to
DPS
happen.
thing. Yeah, it's like the Odin Enrage is like it's a check at the very end to say, are you able to do enough damage to actually beat this fight?
Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of like forced, right? But at the end instead of the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would be great to see some sort of like progression there from like, hey, we're at the end game and our damage starts to matter, and they highlight that before you even get into Savage. I think that would be great. All right, Zeph, was there any other topics that you wanted to hit on that we didn't go over?
I think there was, but I got lost in the last conversation.
I'll let you try to remember that.
the last point.
I'll let you try to remember that, and I'll go to Ren here if there's any other parts that he wanted to hit that we may have not hit yet.
Yeah, damage optimization.
The
Learning your
optimization.
rotation.
Yeah, the same thing. Yeah, just go. Yeah, right back into it. Okay.
No, I really think that anybody looking to tank should just really, you should go into a fight, like Sauce is saying, learn your rotation, doesn't have to be optimal, but you should go into a fight not looking at your hotbar and instantly starting to think of how you could defensively use your kit. And I really wish that your job quests, instead of just being lore or now tank role quest, I really wish they would incorporate something meaningful into the experience of doing endgame. Like maybe you go into your warrior job quest, and if you're not using X cooldowns for this, you're just gonna die, right? It doesn't have to be like you could just muscle through it with enough HP, but maybe it's like something where it's tangibly teaching you, yes, this is how you should do this. Or like you get in there and maybe it's a etiquette on your personal obligation versus party, and you have an NPC in there and they're like, I need nascent flash or I'm gonna die, and then you give it to them and you learn that you use a fell cleave and it'll heal them up. And then the next time it's like, oh, watch out, you're gonna die. Now you're like, oh, I have to use raw intuition instead, and being like, these are the differences, this is how you do this, make these choices. Instead we're in the dark and you're hoping that other players will teach you, and we're very fortunate to have people who are willing to teach. You know, I myself do what I can, everybody in here right now does what they can. But the game doesn't do a good job of that. Bullshit.
And I don't give a fuck.
You get in there and you make Party Finder even harder so that they have to learn.
The more the worse other players are, the better I am. So I'm okay.
You said you want to heal in Party Finder, so we already know. We already know the kind of chaotic evil you are.
I love it.
But I just, in terms of something they could put into the game, just another system that teaches people how to do better. And please don't make the job easier. I know we didn't. This is more of a thing for everything going into Endwalker. I really don't want to see our hotbars reduced to something like pressing 1 1 1 1 1 2 2 2 2 2. I like to keep our combos. I don't want it to be homogenized into one button. A personal feeling. Maybe it's a hot take, but
no, I mean it makes sense.
I don't think making it easier is going to be good.
No, yeah. I feel like we should talk a little bit about Endwalker 2 before we go too much further.
That was actually the point I was going to bring
okay,
up.
Zeph. What thing did we not talk about, Zeph? If you could
well, I was going to say a question I'd like to hear the answer from everyone is, for our favorite tank, what would we like to see going into Endwalker? And well, for me personally, on Paladin, I really like the way Paladin plays. Probably the most glaring one for me would be, and this applies to everyone, is remove arm's length. But that's sort of a general thing. I think I'd like to see cover, not cost gauge. I think they over nerfed cover with removal of mitigation and adding the gauge cost. But besides that, for the most part, I'm satisfied with Paladin. I'm actually very afraid of them changing it in a big way because it is the poster boy of the expansion. My sentiment can basically be summed up as more of the same but better. I would be happy with.
Yeah. I mean, the clemency idea I'm sticking to, dude. OGCD, clemency.
Yeah, that could work.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, you get Equilibrium and Aurora, TBN.
Yeah. I mean, you have the mana to do it. You just need the GCD
means
to not be burnt.
Yeah, add a
a
little bit of
combo when you do
optimization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that would make it to where paladins aren't punished for doing supporty things, because that would be great.
Yeah.
Like main tanking, for instance. So okay, and I'm not going to add anything to that because I'm a paladin, and that's kind of where I'm at. And I feel bad because now we have 3 tanks, and now Ren and Sausage has the responsibility for doing all 3.
Sauce, you take Gunbreaker.
Breaker? Oh, I was gonna say Warrior. I haven't thought about Gunbreaker yet.
Okay, go for Warrior then. I was going to take Warrior. I love Warrior. I mean,
love
Gunbreaker is my
Warrior.
baby.
Yeah,
but
I have
is
both
just
Warrior
for
as
so
well.
long.
Yeah, Warrior is just home, man. Like every time I get a chance to jump in on that, it's like, yeah, this is
That's why I play it in 70 content and Zadnor and stuff. It's the best. All right, what would you do about Warrior?
See, about Warrior, I really didn't like that because the main point of SC changing things, right, is they didn't want any classes to be like excluded from their groups, but Warrior, at least doing more damage or just helping out other classes, like the only ones you're helping is the healer and yourself, because you can keep yourself alive and do stuff.
But the
like,
rate of
but
damage incoming is not enough to offset it.
exactly, yeah. Like the fact that IR is instant crit and direct hit just negates its use to like certain classes, like especially
Infuriate as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
like
Dragoon.
You're not going to have IR for chain stratagem, but you are going to have Infuriate, which means your inner chaos are direct hit critting too. That's a problem.
Yeah, so that's a problem. Apart from that, I really like the idea of like maybe a separate berserk window that just increases your damage outside.
Patch 4.1 Warrior.
Yes,
bring it back. Inner
pretty
release
much.
is half gauge. Berserk is increased damage. Give that back. It was the best iteration of Warrior ever.
Exactly. So if they can do that and they can fit Warrior into, maybe a speed group, that would be awesome. Make it a little bit more complex than it is now, because it is I would say it's the entry level tank.
Yeah, very low CPM.
Yes.
Very sustainable. So if your healers are fresh too, you're gonna be fine.
Do you remember the write-up I did, Rin, regarding Warrior? Like they changed the IR to make it sort of friendly with raid buffs?
Yeah.
So the idea behind that was just, instead of guaranteed direct hit crit, lower it to some arbitrary amount, 50%, 75%. So it's still very likely that you will crit direct hit, but it also means it's not guaranteed, so you can still benefit from aligning it with raid buffs, and then just sort of offset the lower chance by increasing the potency. I think that would go a long way to making Warrior more viable in certain party comps where it can actually make use of certain raid buffs.
They could even do like increase your crit stat within a release instead of your chance, which wouldn't be bad either. I mean, we know they've done that with like Crafting and Gathering where they can manipulate your stat, but increasing rates seems to be the point of contention, because as soon as you're just automatically going to do it on your own, you're now only a detriment to other raid buffs. Now,
exactly.
and now, like, I was actually able to bring Warrior into speed runs for Ifrit and Groot at E6S because of the way the fight timing lined up. But the moment you're not killing it during an ideal window for Warrior is where you're just, not only have you already become a hindrance for buffs, but now you're just a hindrance for the time. But I'm gonna jump to Dark Knight actually for a second.
Okay.
First off, I want to say I don't know about you, Sauce, but I don't really have much to add on Gunbreaker because I think it was released as a perfect job.
Yeah, I like it. as is.
kind of shown by it only got one change. It got 2 changes in this expansion. One was a sound effect change, which was nothing tangible. The other one was a buff to the brutal shell shield for no reason. I think the class was perfect. I think the class was released perfect. Now, people might say they want continuation to be able to use it a longer distance. Sure. Maybe since continuation is 1 button, make Gnashing Fang 1 button, whatever. I think that's just a little bit of bloat, but really, I think the job was really just released. Banging. Change that I would make is pertaining to Dark Knight. I would change Blood Weapon and Delirium to be a charge system like Atonement. Your next 5 GCDs do this rather than almost 10 seconds, but not quite. And if you're lagging, you're going to miss it. I don't like that. I think it changes things because you're going to run in, you're going to hope your Blood Weapon does what it needs to. Otherwise, you're kind of boned, and maybe it'll change it. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be the difference between whether you get a TB on at a specific point. But really, if they're making all these other homogenizations and like quality of life changes, that is the most glaring one to me, is just change that. I mean, sure, they still get Salted Earth, so you got to think about where you position the boss. But I think the Blood Weapon is the biggest issue for me.
No.
What do you think about the mana tick system, Rin? Because I know
that gives Dark Knight the ability to have complexity, so I'm not going to say it's bad. Because before, it just came to whether or not you could spam Dark Arts enough.
Yes.
Now, you do have to think about it a little bit. You got to save your windows. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think the pre-pull memes or something. And I mean, Monk, Black Mage, Dark Knight, they all kind of suffer the same fate, right? Where you want to do some pre-pully shenanigans, but it doesn't affect most players, I feel.
Okay. So I'll ask this question then. In 6 years, we'll get our 5th tank. Because I can't move for quite a while. But what is even the next tank? Like, what will people be daydreaming about for the next 6 years? Can you guys even think of anything?
A lot of things they haven't done yet. Is this assuming combat stays the same?
I guess
like the flow of fights, the pacing.
Yeah,
of
assuming
combat?
mostly it stays the same. I was thinking if they could have something. I mean, they do have a lot of kind of magical type tanks, right? Paladin, Dark Knight, they're kind of magical. Then you have Warrior, who's like mostly physical. Gunbreaker's mostly physical. So I guess it doesn't really matter which direction they go in that way. But I don't know what's really missing.
At this point, maybe something that actually benefits from running a lot of skill speed. I thought Gunbreaker might be that, but it's just not enough to make it worth it. So maybe something that runs a lot of skill speed, or maybe runs off of more dots. I think it would be really cool to have like an AoE cover. Would be really badass as their invuln. They just block one attack for everybody. And not for like 10 seconds or something, maybe just like one hit. Like this AoE is now canceled if you're going to keep invulns for everybody else. Otherwise, everybody's just going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could. That's actually an interesting idea, not having an invuln be necessarily for yourself.
Make it a small limit break or something.
So honestly, I didn't think the Paladins were going to get intervene. I thought they were going to get a gap closer to an ally that shields them when they jump to them.
That would be
fully
cool.
thought that that's what they would have given them, and I thought that would have been so awesome. It's not damage, but it is utility, and I felt like it would fit the identity of a paladin who's like the bastion for people.
Mm-hmm.
And you follow someone that is going to the boss.
Yeah, you have to gap close. It'd be a little bit more creative with it, yeah. I don't know. I guess if I had to think of a tank, I would want a mechanical tank. Well, no, we have a mechanical tank. Never mind, we have Gunbreaker, don't we?
Yeah. I think Gunbreaker really like hits the nail on the head with anything we were missing.
Yeah. When I think tank, range tank. Let's do a range tank. Where you're ranged and you're
range tank.
A tank with pets. You tank with your pet. You all right? You control your pet's tank.
Summoner with Titan Egg.
Just move Titan over to another job, and it's the tank summoner. I don't know. I can't even think about it anymore.
Yeah, I try to Google that too, and like I'll,
Okay, so this isn't limited to tank, but a job I wanted to see in the game was maybe like an aura site creation type kind of thing where like now we know that we have the power of creation. What if we were able to imbue ourselves like a primal, like how Lady Iceheart becomes Shiva? What if we became an invoked like primal? So maybe you invoke Sephiroth and you're more tanky for that duration, and then like the tanks can invoke like Zervan or something, and now you're doing more damage for a little bit, and that's your burst window. Like how Ravana had his different shields, right?
They'll do that with
One of those
Summoner
more
before they
damage
do that
tank.
with.
Probably,
Yeah,
True.
probably.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's just not much left I could think that they're going to be able to do. And honestly, the more jobs they add, the less they're able to be creative, right? Because how do you make something that's unique that is also included and doesn't exclude something else as a result?
So, do you think after this expansion they're going to add one job an expansion?
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
yeah. I don't think we're gonna get another tank.
You don't think
I
we're
don't-
ever going to get
yeah,
another tank?
two-
Final Fantasy
4
17.
tanks, 4 healers seems to be,
Yeah.
to me, the magic spot. Is how do you can't add another one without there immediately being a divide.
Yeah.
Or
I-
the same thing.
I think it's just gonna be DPS additions after Endwalker.
Maybe
Or
one
they'll
more
just
time.
throw a
have-
magical one that does all three. All right, just one that could change what it does. It could be a tank healer,
Squire.
or they could finally start splitting the jobs and say, "Hey, Paladin can be tank or DPS or tank or healer." Right? You can start
What do you think,
giving
like
them
sub-job
talent
system,
trees or
maybe?
something like
It'll be
that.
a pretty
Yeah.
big change.
Honestly, I thought we were going to
Oh.
go to 99 and then they'll sub job us or something.
You know, maybe. Anyways, a whole nother conversation. I feel like we talked a good bit about tanks today pretty well. We went over a good bit. Overall, in my opinion, tanks are not in a horrible spot with Final Fantasy XIV. I think they're doing pretty well. There are definitely things they can improve upon and would make them way more enjoyable. And it's so much easier to notice the little fine details of things when we play as much as we all do.
You know, for all the things we said critically about them, I will say that it's the most balanced it has ever been. And I think it's the easiest, it's the best time to get into tanking. If you want to try it, it's to me, it's the most welcoming.
Yeah.
Not just tanks, but I like that when people are new to the game, I can say just play whatever you want. Everything is viable. Everything does enough damage. Everything mitigates enough. Everything heals enough. You really can just choose whatever you want, and you don't get that in many MMOs, if at all.
I get a lot of people who think we're dismissive when we say that, but I mean this honestly. You can play whatever you want. You're not going to be excluded. You're not going to do poorly. You can clear anything you want.
Yeah. Unless you have a time machine and you go back to Heaven's Ward.
Or you're PvPing as a Dark Knight.
Yeah, that's true. Anyways, this has been a great conversation. You guys have all been a blast here. I'm glad we brought Sausage Roll on. Although I had my doubts and I thought maybe he was just a dancer or something. I didn't know what he was doing anymore. But I'm glad you came on. Great job. And I'm going to go ahead and do around, say all the shout outs you want to do and where people can find you and everything else. And I'm going to start with Mr. New Guy here, Sausage Roll, if you don't mind.
Well, first off, I just want to say thank you for the invitation, man. This has been really fun.
Mm-hmm.
I was nervous most of the time, but I think this is a good experience.
You did great.
Yeah. Thanks for everyone here. Thanks to my boys in chat too, European homies, and yeah, just everyone in my community. Thank you guys so much for supporting all of us.
Okay. Where can people find you, dude, if they need to find you?
You can find me at Sauce of the Roll on Twitch.
Do you
Sauce
spell
of the
like
Roll.
that?
Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Exactly. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just fixed my internet, so I will be going back to streaming soon.
Okay. All right. Well, Zep, your shout outs and where people can find you.
Oh, well, yeah, just thanks to everyone. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. And thanks for being so supportive as well, just in general. All of my viewers and community, I really appreciate it. Speaking of which, you can find me at Zeph Zayora on Twitch. If you'd like
Remember how
to
spell
do a shout out.
Ziara. There we go.
Good luck.
So-
Yeah, you can also find me at Zeph Z or Z. I'll just say Zeph Z. It's not many Australians here, I guess, or English. But yeah, that'll be on Twitter. And yeah, if you're interested in 1v1s, clearing the 1v1s, I am planning on writing some guides for those, if that's something you want to look out for.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Dueling Square or something. Dueling Circle.
Oh,
Me being the wolves,
1v1 me.
Yeah.
No, yeah, the 1v1s in Bosnia.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to try and put some stuff out for those.
Okay. And Ren, you want to end it?
I'm Rin. You could find me at. I've since changed all of my medias now to just be my name. So you can find me on Twitter, Rin Karigani, and YouTube as well. Obviously on Twitch. I want to send a couple of thank yous first to my wife, who is absolutely wonderful and allows me to be able to help create content and help y'all become better tanks and help me grow too. Also, I want to send a couple of thank yous out to my team Undisputed, Team Drifter, and all of our lovely people out. We are always having the community do so well. And everybody that's really just coming into the game and trying it. Seriously, like we're going into Endwalker. It's going to be really great. It's going to be explosive. We have more people trying the game, and I'm really thankful that we have people who are just coming in, asking questions, helping spread positivity. And my biggest thank you goes to you at home. You know who you are.
Well, you guys have been a blast here. Thank you so much for coming on and making this show happen. And we have lots more of these shows coming up, but I felt like tanking was a great one to start on because it's been a little while since we've done it. And it's going to be probably the one with the least amount of changes, I think, going into Endwalker. The other ones are going to, like healers are going to be, I have no clue what's going to happen with healers. Yeah.
Astro?
Yeah, Astro just...
And Summoner 2 is in for an overhaul, I think they said, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. As a reminder, the live letter is Friday. I think they're going to be doing a live letter. And we will be doing another show following that up to talk about just in general what they discussed. Hopefully they give us some content and they don't rehash Triple Triad.
Give me one more shout out because all three of us didn't say it.
Do it.
So Sausage, Zeph, and myself are going to be starting all tank runs of a couple of different fights. We're doing a tour of all of the Eden Savage fights. Those will be on Monday and Wednesday nights. Monday we're not going to have Sauce, but we're going to get somebody to put on a little wig and pretend. So that'll be at like 11 p.m. Eastern Standard. I think Zeph is almost done changing your sleep schedule, right? So we should be doing that in the upcoming week.
Okay. Yeah, you guys should definitely check that out. That sounds absolutely amazing. I'm looking forward to figure out which ones you have the most trouble with, and that if there are ones that you just can't do. So we'll see.
I'm excited for Shiva and Titan. And Titan.
But that being said, as well, there's some other stuff to let you know of too. I am going to be on State of the Realm tomorrow at noon Pacific time. If you guys want to watch that on Happy's channel, we're going to be talking about a handful of things, but one of them is going to be about podcasting and stuff like that. So that'll be kind of fun if you want to get a little bit more insight on the nonsense that I put together. Do that. And then let's see what else. I don't have any Chuckabah races coming up soon. Or anything else too crazy like that. I do know that I think Face Temperance is doing something this month, aren't they? Or is it beginning of next month?
Yes, there's the hell mode of. There's a couple of things going on right now. I'll pull it up right now so I don't misspeak either.
Sure.
There's Heaven on High speed runs. There is also. And I don't know if anybody's competing in that. If you're not, you can go over to Face Temperance and take part of that. It's super badass. But that's probably the one I'm going to be most excited to watch because I think it's the first time they're doing Deep Dungeon, right? And then there's also going to be a mode of. Did they decide on which one it's going to be exactly? I didn't check. It's just a Savage Hell mode.
Okay.
So, we don't know the restrictions yet, but the closer we get, we'll know some. It's going to be awesome, but I don't think you could use any of the Bostra gear, so you'll just have to use what you got.
Yeah.
There's
a shitload of stuff to promote, guys. By the way, there's apparently also a Crystal and team is putting together a LunarCon, which is in about a month or so. Yeah, and it's just basically a fan event where people are going to come together. Ren, yeah, you're part of that too, apparently.
Yeah, I love conventions, anime,
Yeah.
video game, you name it. And now we're gonna be getting Shen's putting together LunarCon, and it's been super awesome. It looks like it's ramping up to be a really fun time, and I hope you'll be there. I'll be in game cosplaying. I don't know if I'll be out of game.
But that's awesome. Yeah, I know. And so we're going to see that happen. And I may be part of it doing something. I don't know yet. It depends on if I have the time. Time is so difficult now. It really is. I got to save all the time I can. Just push it towards Endwalker and burn it all there, because that's going to be like super huge for us. But please check that out if you guys haven't already. There's a link there to kind of get a little bit more information. And with that being said, I guess I can go and do my final shout-outs here. I have to shout out my wife, beautiful, wonderful wife that supports me and allows me to do this without being horribly upset with me, burning my Saturday afternoons having fun, talking with friends about Final Fantasy XIV, because it's so much fun for me. Again, this show is always just an excuse to talk to people about Final Fantasy XIV. It's a very selfish thing to do. And then also, thank you to Andre Kane for the music and the intro and the closing. Thank you very much to all the people who came to watch, all the people who support on Patreon, all the people who support by just being here and watching in general. Thank you, everybody. And we will be back next week for Live Letter. Until then, remember to, be good, keep cool, stay frosty. Bye, guys! Everybody say bye.
Bye.
Everyone, thank you for watching the show. Of course, I want to show you guys another wonderful video of when we went on vacation here. While I thank Patreon viewers, there was a little fish that kept following me around while we were out on the beach. It was a little rainbow fish. But let me go ahead and get to it. This segment, of course, is to do special thanks to some really amazing supporters of the show. There's a few people, organizations in Final Fantasy XIV. Ock Morning, great resource for rating. Then there's Teamcraft, a great resource for crafting. And Phase Temperance, a organization that puts together events for a lot of PvE content. Of course, there are also some viewers that completely just support the show, and they're not part of any organization. That is Dude It's Antonio, Tag, Nami, Fury, and Megan C, Daniel H, and Psyche. So thank you all for supporting. Just heads up, we do have those mugs being sent out to a lot of these supporters. That should be going out hopefully within the next couple of weeks. And if you guys want to support the show, you can also just check out the Patreon page. You don't have to by any means at all. We are going to be using those funds to support doing some reading digest for the MogTalks. Hopefully this could be something that we do in the future. So again, thank you all. Have a wonderful day. Bye.